You wake before the sun has fully claimed the Nile. The air is cool, the kind of cool that carries the faintest promise of warmth, as though the day is quietly rolling toward you. Reeds stir at the water's edge in a slow, swaying rhythm, brushing against one another with a sound like dry paper. The surface of the river reflects the pale sky, still more silver than blue, the light scattered by the ripples of early currents. Somewhere nearby, a bird gives a long, drawn-out call, not in a hurry to be answered. Your mouth tastes of sleep dry, faintly stale, holding on to the memory of last night's meal. There is the ghost of onion and lentils, because the meal was simple and filling, and onions have a way of lingering longer than one might wish. You breathe out into the cool air, half hoping the wind will carry it away. You rise from the reed mat and feel the faint imprint it has left on your skin. The smell of the mat itself is a mix of dried river grass and the faint dampness from the evening's air. A clay cup sits by your side, still holding a mouthful of water from last night, cool from the stone floor. You drink it slowly, letting it move around your teeth before swallowing. It helps, but only slightly. Historians agree that the ancient Egyptians valued cleanliness, but they debate how much attention was given specifically to the freshness of the breath. It is certain, however, that personal scent, the way one's body and clothing smelled, was of great social importance. Breath, being part of that personal aura, likely shared in that value. Across the courtyard, you see a neighbor leaning against a low wall, working a small chewing stick between his teeth. The motion is slow, unhurried, the stick moving like a tiny broom, sweeping a familiar floor. He nods in greeting, and the movement of his lips suggests he is already speaking to someone behind him, perhaps his wife, though the words do not reach you. The Nile moves, as it always does, pulling softly at its own banks. The river smells faintly of fish, of mud, and of wet clay jars that have been lowered into it for cooling. The scent mixes with the sharper green of fresh reed stalks that have been cut and are drying nearby. You stand for a long moment, breathing the layers in, each one distinct, each one settling into you as though they belong there. It is early enough that the market is not yet alive, but you know the moment will come when the air is suddenly busier, richer with spice, sweat, and heat. For now, there is only the faint echo of sandals on stone somewhere deeper in the village. You imagine the first bread being set into the ovens, the smell of it creeping slowly outward. Long before the loaf is ready, you step closer to the water's edge. Your sandals press into the soft bank, leaving small, clean impressions. The river does not pause for you, nor does it notice the stale air you carry from your mouth, but you notice it the way it seems to promise renewal without offering it immediately. The current is steady, the light is soft, and somewhere beyond the bend, unseen fishermen are starting their work. The coolness clings a little longer before the day's heat begins to pull it away. You breathe out once more and think perhaps the air itself has a way of washing you clean if you give it enough time. You take another sip from the clay jar, this time drawing the water in more deliberately. It feels cool against your tongue, not icy, never icy here, but fresh from being stored in the shade overnight. The jar's rim tastes faintly of clay dust, a reminder of its making, and as the water moves through your mouth, you tilt your head slightly, letting it touch each corner before swallowing. The dryness eases, but the faint onion still lingers, stubborn as a memory. In the pale light, the surface of the Nile has shifted from silver to a muted gold, the first real warmth of the sun arriving in slow degrees. Small insects skim over the water's skin, making tiny ripples that vanish almost as soon as they appear. A lone ibis wades near the reeds, stepping with patient precision, as though it does not wish to disturb whatever invisible current guides it. Historians agree that morning rinses where common water, often infused with herbs or cooled in porous jars, was taken not only to drink, but to swish and spit, especially upon waking. But there is debate about whether this was strictly a hygiene ritual or part of broader morning offerings and prayers. Was it a purely personal act, or a gesture folded into one's spiritual duties? That question still hangs between fragments of papyrus and the conjectures of scholars. You pour a little water into your hand and bring it to your lips again, swishing this time with more vigor. The sound is soft but present in your ears, like a faint tide rolling in and out. Some of it slips down your throat, cool and welcome, but most you let fall back to the ground, darkening the pale dust at your feet. The earth drinks quickly here. Nearby, a low table holds yesterday's reed-woven basket of dates. The fruit still dark and glossy despite the night's coolness. Their scent carries a heavy sweetness that seems to settle in the air, unlike the sharp, clean smell you're chasing this morning. You resist the urge to eat one. The sugar would only wrap itself around what you're trying to erase. Beyond the courtyard, a thin ribbon of smoke rises from a neighbor's kitchen. You know this smell well. It's the scent of kindling starting in an open clay hearth. There's no food scent yet, just the first dry crackle of palm fronds taking the flame. The air will change soon, filling with bread, beans, and all the lingering perfumes of breakfast. Now is the moment to cleanse your mouth before those layers arrive. Your bare feet brush over the worn threshold as you step toward the back of the house, where a small basin of water rests under the slight shade of an overhanging awning. This is not drinking water, it's meant for washing hands, rinsing the mouth, and cooling the face. The basin is decorated with faint blue patterns, worn from years of use. The design's more suggestion than clarity now. You cup the water, noticing how quickly your skin feels its coolness. Swish, spit, breathe. Again, the act is mechanical, almost meditative. You wonder if it's the repetition itself that freshens you, or the water, or the way it forces you to pause before the day truly begins. Perhaps it's all three. The breeze that moves past you carries the river's scent again, but this time it's mixed with the distant hum of voices traders arriving early, setting down their goods before the sun takes its full place overhead. You think of the marketplace air that will soon wrap itself around you, full of spice, resin, and the heat of bodies pressed together in narrow lanes. But for now, you stand in the quiet with a mouth that feels just a little more your own. You choose a slender twig from the small bundle kept near the doorway, tucked in a pottery cup with a few dried reeds. It is smooth along its length, but the tip has been bruised before, softened by use and a little soak, so the fibers splay like the bristles of a miniature broom. You bring it to your nose first, as you always do. It smells faintly green and a little sweet, like the memory of sap. You turn it in your fingers and feel the slight give in the wood. It is ready. You press the frayed end against your front teeth and begin the gentle, practiced motion. It is not a scrub, not a scrape, not a command. It is a coaxing, a slow, repeated conversation between wood and tooth. The fibers separate and fan out, finding the small places where last night's stew would like to live forever. The rhythm is easy to hold. Up and down, a pause, a turn, side to side, another pause. Your jaw loosens, your tongue rests, your breath grows quieter. You taste the faint bitterness of the twig as the fibers release what they have stored, a mild tannic flavor that brings a clean dryness to your mouth. Some mornings you prefer a sharper twig, one that stings a little, one that makes your gums tingle. Today, this is enough. The bristles flex, then spring back, carrying away the layer you do not want to keep. You spit into the dust at the threshold. The mark darkens, then fades as the ground drinks it in. A mainstream certainty sits comfortably within your morning habit. The people of this land cared for their mouths. They used sticks, toothpicks, powders, and rinses. They valued clean teeth and sweetened breath. Remedies for the mouth appear among other household simples and temple perfumes, and they travel easily from courtyard to courtyard by memory alone. This fact is steady like the river, not loud, not showy, but always there. You turn the twig and nibble its tip to fray it further. The fibers split like fine threads of linen. You brush the inside surface of your teeth with slow, small circles. There is a soft rustle, the only sound the bristles make as they pass over enamel. You feel the line where gum meets tooth, that border you have learned to respect. You keep the motion gentle, not pressing too hard, because you have learned what happens when you hurry. The gums protest, and your mouth sulks for the rest of the day. The courtyard begins to warm. Light climbs the wall and touches the earthen jars that rest in a neat cluster. A fly inspects the rim of one jar, decides it has no business there, and changes its mind in a quick, indecisive loop. You keep brushing. You move to the back teeth, widening your mouth slightly, leaning your head to find the angle. The twig's scent grows faintly sweeter as the bruised fibers warm. Your tongue follows after, the simple inspector, testing each tooth for any roughness left behind. A fringe rumor, the kind that elders pass along with a smile, whispers that the best twigs come from the youngest palm shoots cut at dawn, quickly wrapped in a damp leaf and carried behind the ear so their virtue does not escape. Whether this makes the twig better or simply more beloved, you cannot say. You have tried it both ways. Carrying a twig tucked behind the ear does make you feel slightly more prepared, like a traveler who brings his own cup to the well. You pinch the twig again and, with your thumbnail, peel away a thin ribbon of bark to expose brighter, wetter fibers beneath. The new bristles take to the work eagerly. You move along the gum line. A slow sweep, a pause, another slow sweep, giving each place the same attention. If you keep the pace steady, the minutes pass without effort. It feels like weaving, like smoothing down a stubborn crease in cloth. Your breath grows more even. The stale edge softens. There is uncertainty here too, the kind scholars enjoy. They argue over which wood was favored for these sticks: tamarisk, palm, acacia, and whether the choice followed taste, season, or simple convenience. They wonder whether certain temple districts preferred certain trees, whether a scribe's household swore by one twig while a boatman's household swore by another. The fragments do not say. The jars and baskets and scraps of writing are generous with hints and stingy with answers. You accept the mystery the way you accept the river's bend. You know it is there, and you move on. You rinse the twig in a little water and taste the mingled flavors: green wood, faint earth, a trace of yesterday's honey clinging to your tongue. The bristles soften further, and for a few passes you brush only the front teeth again, admiring the way they feel newly smooth to the touch of your tongue. Smoothness is a quiet victory. It does not announce itself, but you notice it with every breath. You reach for a second twig from the cup, shorter and stiffer. This one you reserve for the tongue. You press gently and draw it forward. Slow, even strokes from back to front, careful as you near the tip. The taste is different here. Salt and old air, and the reluctant give of the tongue's rough surface. You pause, breathe, and continue. When you spit, the flavor that returns is cleaner, thin as linen and not at all heavy. A memory of a market conversation wanders through your mind. A spice seller swearing that a drop of resin on the twig myrrh, if you can spare, it turns the morning entirely around. He said the resin makes your mouth taste like temple smoke and honey cakes. Perhaps he wanted to sell more resin. Perhaps he was right. On festival days, when you can afford it, you dot the twig with a crumb of resin and let it soften as you brush. The smell blooms and lingers, and your breath feels as if it has been dipped in a fragrant room and set out to dry. You turn your head toward the doorway. Voices pass in the lane like a soft current. A girl laughing at something small. A man discussing grain. The particular clack of jars against a wooden yoke. The day is building itself from ordinary sounds, each one fitting into place without hurry. Your mouth feels lighter, less occupied by the past. Another uncertainty drifts beside you as you work. Was the morning brushing a private habit in this house? A matter of personal comfort? Or did some families fold it into a small offering? A moment of cleanliness placed before household gods. The written pieces hint in both directions. A basin before a statue suggests reverence. A basin by the back door suggests convenience. You prefer to let the act be both. A small kindness to the self, and, if noticed by any listening presence, a wordless token of respect. You finish with small, careful strokes along the very edges of your front teeth, the way a scribe might neaten the margins of a page. Then you bite down softly on the twig to test its last strength. The fibers have wilted into silky threads. You snap off the used end, set the good remainder to dry on the rim of the cup, and sweep the spent fibers into your palm. They look like a little tassel from a garment that has done its work and can rest. You rinse your mouth with a mouthful of cool water, rolling it over teeth and tongue, then let it fall in a thin stream that darkens the dust at your feet. You breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth. The breath that returns to you is your own, only simpler, and it carries no great announcement, just the absence of what you wish to leave behind. You wipe your lips with the back of your hand and taste nothing at all, which, this morning, is the best taste of all. The sun has found the courtyard fully now, laying a pale gold across the wall. You place the cup back in its corner and feel the quiet satisfaction that follows a small task done well. The day can proceed. Your mouth has already arrived. You step out into the lane that curves toward the marketplace. The air is still mild, though the sun is climbing steadily, its light turning the pale dust underfoot into something warm and almost golden. The market is not yet in full voice, but it is beginning to clear its throat. The shuffle of baskets, the call of greetings between early arrivals, the dry squeak of a cartwheel that needs oil. You breathe in and find the faint residue of the morning's brushing mingling with the scents ahead. The first spice stall is already open. Its awning sags slightly in the middle, where last week's wind left a crease, and the merchant, a man with careful hands, is arranging small clay jars in a neat row. You slow your steps as you pass because the air around him has changed. It is thicker, more complicated. There is myrrh here, and cinnamon, and the sharper bite of dried coriander seed. You taste the air without meaning to, drawing it over your tongue as if sampling his wares. A certain fact is easy to hold. These markets have long carried spices not only for cooking but for scenting the body and sweetening the breath. Recipes for breath, pastilles, small lumps of honey mixed with herbs and resin appear on scraps of papyrus alongside cooking notes and remedies for sore throats. The link between what you eat, what you smell like, and how close others will stand to you is not lost on anyone. The merchant catches your eye and lifts a small jar as though to tempt you. You nod politely, but do not stop yet. Your purpose is not to buy, but to pass through this shifting cloud of aromas. The smell of myrrh in particular lingers as you move on, heavy and slightly bitter, like the edge of temple incense before the sweetness arrives. A fringe notion floats in from memory, one you've heard from traders who travel far upriver, that some merchants will chew a cinnamon stick during trade, not for their own breath, but to cast a subtle spell of persuasion over a customer. The spice's warmth on the air, they claim, makes the listener more agreeable. Whether it is true or merely a tale to make merchants seem more clever than they are, you cannot say. But you remember one such trader whose cinnamon-scented words did, somehow, leave you lighter in coin than you had planned. You pause at a stall where dried mint leaves are piled high, their green dulled to a soft gray, but their scent still sharp when crushed. The seller idly crumbles a leaf between her fingers as she speaks to a neighbor, and the fragrance rides the air to you. Mint is a common choice, for the mouth easy to carry, easy to chew, leaving a coolness that lingers longer than most. You take one leaf, with her nod, and fold it onto your tongue. The texture is brittle at first, then softens as the flavor seeps out. A slow, cool bloom that spreads to your breath. Somewhere down the lane, a jar slips and breaks, the clay shattering with a crisp sound. You glance to see a younger boy sweeping the pieces quickly into a basket, the contents some sort of seed spilling briefly onto the dust before being gathered again. The seeds smell faintly of fennel, another choice for breath freshening, though today their perfume is faint against the stronger sense of mint and resin in the air. Scholars still debate the exact recipes for the most prized breath mixtures of the time. A few fragments list ingredients without amounts, leaving open the question of whether one should taste mostly of honey, mostly of spice, or mostly of resin. Some claim the best mixture was balanced, so that no single element stood out of harmony on the tongue. Others insist the finest were deliberately strong, meant to be noticed like a statement necklace or a vivid garment. In the absence of certainty, people choose according to their own taste, as you do now. The market air is shifting again as more stalls open. The smell of fish, fresh caught, but still fish, curls in from one side, and the dusty sweetness of dates from another. You close your mouth slightly to guard the mint's coolness, letting it play against these new arrivals without being overwhelmed. It is a quiet game of balance between what you carry and what the world brings you. You turn toward the street that will take you back home, passing once more under the hanging strips of dyed cloth that marked the market's entrance. The colors faded blues, deep ochres swayed gently in the morning breeze. Behind you, voices rise in negotiation, and the spice merchant's careful jars glint briefly in the sun. Ahead, the lane narrows, and the air grows simpler again, less crowded with scents. The mint leaf on your tongue is nearly gone, but the freshness it left remains, a soft coolness you carry like a small, private secret. Back in the courtyard, You sit near the low stone table where a small bronze mortar and pestle rest. The metal is worn smooth from years of use, its color deepened to a warm brown by oil and time. Beside it, a shallow bowl holds a measure of thick honey, golden in the morning light, its surface slow-moving and heavy. You take the pestle in hand, enjoying the solid weight of it, and place a few crumbs of pale frankincense resin into the mortar. The first strike is soft, then firmer, the pestle rocking in your palm as it grinds the resin into smaller pieces. The scent rises immediately bright, lemony, and edged with something almost peppery. It cuts through the air like a sharp reed note in a quiet song. You work slowly, letting each press of the pestle break another crystal until the fragments are fine as sand. The honey waits, its own perfume steady and deep, the smell of flowers transformed by time and bees into something both sweet and heavy. The fact is well recorded. Mixtures of honey and resin were used in ancient Egypt to freshen the breath, the stickiness of the honey holding the fragrant particles together in small, portable lumps. Chewing one coated the tongue and teeth with sweetness while releasing the resin's sharp scent. Such lumps could be kept in a small jar or wrapped in linen, ready for travel or for polite conversation. You pour the powdered resin into the honey and stir with the pestle's handle. The two merge slowly, the crystals vanishing into the thick gold, leaving only a darker swirl in the mix. The smell changes as they combine, less sharp, more rounded, with the sweetness now pulling the fragrance downward into something mellow and lingering. You scoop a bit onto your finger and roll it into a small, soft pellet. It glistens in the light, catching tiny glints where the resin still holds to its crystalline shape. A fringe claim lingers in the memory of this practice, that such pellets could also protect against illness, the resin acting as a purifier of the breath and, by extension, of the body. Whether this was faith or fact is unclear. You have seen people chew them before entering crowded gatherings, pressing them between their molars, as if they were small charms as well as small sweets. You place the pellet in your mouth, letting it sit against your tongue without chewing at first. The honey warms quickly, softening and releasing its floral richness. The resin follows, a bright thread weaving through the sweetness. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing slowly so the flavor moves through your nose as well as your mouth. The mixture is patient. It unfolds over time, changing from sharp to smooth to something faintly herbal, leaving no single note dominant for long. Scholars still puzzle over the exact proportions used in these breath pellets. The recipes that survive are incomplete, or assume knowledge that was common then, but lost now. Did they use more resin for a stronger effect, risking a bitterness some would dislike? Or did they rely on honey's sweetness to carry just a hint of resin, enough to be pleasant but not commanding? The answer shifts depending on whose hand held the mortar and whose mouth would receive the result. You chew slowly now, breaking the pellet apart with your molars, feeling the grit of resin for a moment before it melts into the honey. The sweetness coats your tongue, clinging even after you swallow. Your breath feels fuller, warmer, as if scented air now lives in your chest. In the courtyard, the shade is shrinking. A lizard skitters along the wall, pauses in a patch of sun, and blinks before moving on. Somewhere beyond the gate, a donkey's hooves tap a slow, uneven rhythm on stone, the sound passing and fading. You lick your lips and taste the last trace of resin. Almost gone, but not entirely. It will stay with you for a while yet, a quiet companion as the day unfolds. You find the little bundle of palm fibers where you left it yesterday, tucked into the rim of a jar so it can dry between uses. It looks like a miniature broom someone forgot to finish, a twist of coarse strands bound at one end with a strip of softened reed, the other end flared into a fan the color of straw. You wet it with a splash from the basin. The fibers darken to a gentle brown and grow more pliant, sighing together the way reeds do when the wind changes. You bring the frayed end to your teeth and begin with the front, where the sun touches first when you smile. The motion is small and even, a light polishing more than a scrub, as though you are persuading a dull stone to remember it was once a river pebble. The fibers whisper against enamel, a sound like cloth rubbed between finger and thumb. It is a patient sound. You keep the angle shallow so the bristles graze the gum line without poking it, and you let your breath move slowly through your nose, unhurried, as if each stroke were a counted measure in a simple song. A certainty slides easily into the moment. People of this land cleaned their teeth with more than water. Toothpicks, twigs, powders, and fibrous swabs have their faint echoes in remains and texts. Jars marked for mouth care share shelves with oils and salves. Mouths were tended much like skin and hair, not as decoration but as daily keeping. The feel of palm fiber on enamel fits naturally within that, keeping a tool made from the same trees that shade the courtyards and sweeten the meals. You turn the bundle a little and work along the edges of your front teeth where yesterday's crumbs like to linger. The fibers flex and spring back, carrying away what is loose and worrying free what is stubborn. They taste faintly of the palm itself, clean, woody, with the ghost of dust that clings to anything honest. Your tongue follows after to test the smoothness, finding less to complain about with each pass. The difference is not dramatic, it is steady. A fringe tidbit, told by a neighbor with an air of secret knowledge, says that if you rub the fibers first in a pinch of finely powdered date stone, the polish becomes brighter, like burnishing a copper bowl with a paste of ash and oil. You have tried it once or twice, curious to see if the teeth would gleam as promised. Perhaps they did a little. Perhaps it was the careful rubbing more than the powder. The tale persists because it is charming to imagine a fruit stone giving your smile back to you. You rinse the fibers and move to the back teeth. The angle is different here. You open your jaw slightly and drop your chin, guiding the bristles with the same care you would give to threading a bead. Slow circles, small strokes, a brief pause to let the bristles splay and settle. You think of a mat maker combing reeds before weaving, aligning the straws so that the finished surface will lie flat and serene. Your mouth is a small mat, and the brush learns its pattern. Scholars still wonder about the exact forms these brushes took. Were the fibers bundled thickly as yours are, or tied in finer tufts to a little stick? Were the bindings permanent, replaced only when the ends wore down? Or was each bundle meant for a handful of days and then discarded? Some jars show residue that might be from plant fibers. Some simply show that something was dipped and used. The certainty blurs at the edges, and where it blurs, people like you make do with what the hands can craft and what the mouth approves. You dip the bristles in a small dish where a pinch of natron has been dissolved to a thin slurry. The taste is mineral and clean, a dry brightness that reminds you of fresh linen. The fibers carry a little of it as you continue, and the faint grit helps persuade the last roughness to release. You are careful. Too much natron can make the mouth sulk, but a little sharpness wakes the enamel in a way that feels honest. The courtyard answers with its own quiet chorus. A swallow skims the air, stitching one side of the sky to the other with a brief line. Somewhere beyond the wall, a potter begins turning his wheel, and you hear the steady, soft thud of a foot setting the rhythm. The brush keeps time with him, the strokes and the wheel falling into a shared pace you do not plan but happily keep. You pause to rinse and spit into the dust, the wet patch blooming and then fading as the ground accepts it. Your lips taste of natron, and the slight sweetness that even plain water seems to carry when the day is young. You run your tongue over the chewing edges of your teeth. They no longer catch. The little places that felt like uncombed hair now lie flat. You make a small, satisfied hum that no one hears. A memory rises of an older cousin who swore by rubbing the teeth with a thread of linen dragged taut between the front and back, claiming it sang the food right out from where it hid. He would do it after the palm brush, as a final flourish, smiling around the strip of cloth like a performer with a ribbon. It looked absurdly delicate, but the ribbon trick worked well enough that you keep a scrap of linen near your bundle for days when thoroughness feels like kindness. Whether anyone else does the same is not recorded. These are the little private practices that live and die in single households. You attend now to the places where tooth meets gum, pressing so lightly that the fibers bend and tremble rather than jab. The gums respond best when treated as shy guests, too much attention and they retreat, just enough and they warm to you. You count 10 soft strokes along each curve, the numbers barely formed in your mind, more felt than spoken. Counting calms the brush, calms the breath, calms the day. Another uncertainty hovers, pleasant because it will never fully resolve. Did people scent these fiber bundles with a touch of oil, or did they prefer them plain? You have seen tiny bottles of perfumed oil near wash basins, and you have seen equally tidy corners with only water and fiber. When you dab a drop of diluted myrrh on the binding, the smell rises as you work, but it is hard to say whether it freshens more than it merely pleases. Perhaps pleasing is its own kind of fresh. You finish with a last rinse, letting water roll over the teeth and under the tongue, holding it there until your cheeks round and then releasing it in a quiet stream. The brush you shake gently, running your thumb through the bristles to free anything they have gathered. You set it to dry on the rim of the same jar as before, the handle snug under the lip so the fan hangs freely in the moving air. A simple tool needs only a simple rest. You close your mouth and draw breath slowly through your nose, then release it. What returns is soft and undecorated, a clean breath that carries no particular announcement except that attention has been paid. You press your lips together and feel the slight drag of skin against skin, the kind of small friction that says there is no film laying claim to the day. The light in the courtyard is stronger now, the wall warming from pale to honey. You smooth the damp along your chin with the back of your hand and consider the work complete. Not a performance, not a ceremony. Just careful polishing with a familiar bundle tied from a tree that grows everywhere you look. The mouth agrees. The day, which always asks for more than you plan to give, can have this version of you, quiet, even, and lightly shining where it matters most. You tear a narrow strip from the edge of an old sheet of papyrus, the kind already filled with household tallies and a fading list of lentils owed. The fibers show themselves plainly where the tear runs, pale threads laid crosswise like dry riverbeds. You rub the strip between your fingers to soften it, listening to the faint crackle as the plant yields a little. The sound is neither paper nor cloth. It is the sound of a reed remembering it was once a reed. You fold the strip upon itself, then fold again, working it into a small, springy wad. The edges roughen as you need, and the pad takes a shape made for your fingers. You dip it in a dish of clean water, lift it, and squeeze gently so that only a cool dampness remains. Held to your lips, the wad smells faintly of the Nile's bank green, chalky, with a whisper of mud baked thin by the sun. You open your mouth and set the pad on your tongue. The first press is cautious, exploratory, a polite knock at a door that always opens but prefers to be asked. You draw it forward in a slow pull, letting the roughness of the fibers catch and gather the film that night leaves behind. The motion is deliberate. Set, press, draw, rinse, fold. Set, press, draw, rinse. You keep the stroke shallow near the tip where the tongue is quick to protest, deeper toward the back where sleep hides what it has no right to keep. A steady fact takes its seat here. Papyrus filled many roles beyond writing. Mats, cords, baskets, sandals, and humble swabs all borrowed its layered strength. In a house that keeps papyrus for lists and letters, there is always a narrow margin to repurpose, a corner to fold into usefulness. The mouth benefits from this thrift, a small wad that polishes without cutting, strong enough to scrape, soft enough to comfort. You rinse the pad in a little bowl, watching faint cloudiness bloom in the water for a heartbeat before it vanishes into clarity again. You refold, presenting a cleaner face of the wad to the work. The taste it leaves behind is not flavor so much as a texture, a clean dryness like the feel of washed linen hung in shade. Your breath notices the difference before your mind does. It flows a little further, as if the corridor has been swept. A fringed tidbit wanders in with a neighbor's chuckle. Some swear that rubbing the papyrus wad first over a sliver of pomegranate peel lends the tongue a shy perfume and a faint red glow, proof to onlookers that the mouth has been tended. The claim walks the lane with other charming boasts, that the peel tightens the tongue like a drummer stretching his skin, that the scent convinces even onions to behave. Whether any of this holds is a matter for gossip. The peel, at least, tastes politely bitter and does no harm. You return to the work without the peel today, preferring the plain reed. You lay the pad flat and press it against the broad middle of the tongue, drawing forward in slow, even paths. Each pass leaves the surface smoother, the way a scribe's burnisher calms the nap of a page before ink. The comparison pleases you. Your mouth is being made ready for the day's words, even if most of those words will be modest ones. Greetings, prices, thanks, and a few private thoughts that never reach the air. Here comes the familiar uncertainty scholars enjoy. Was the tongue scrape a morning habit common to most households, or a fussier practice kept by those who live near scribes and perfumers? Fragments speak of mouth pastes and rinses with more confidence than they speak of scrapers. A line or two hints at wiping the tongue with cloth or leaf, and a few gritty residues on small bowls could belong to this or that. The record nods and then looks away. You take the nod and make of it a routine, because the routine pleases you. You work the edges now, where the tongue meets the inner line of teeth. You fold the pad into a tighter corner and trace the soft border, listening for the small, almost silky sound as the fibers move over the moist surface. When you pause, saliva pools in its ordinary way, and you let it because it helps. The mouth is a river with its own current. You are just arranging the stones. The courtyard reflects you back in small signs. A jar sweats lightly in the shade, its porous belly cooling the water within. A cat, convinced that all soft things belong to cats, eyes the papyrus wad with ceremonial suspicion and then feigns indifference, which is a cat's way of saying yes. You turn the pad to a fresh face again, and again the little cloud appears in the rinse bowl and then forgets itself. A memory of instruction threads through your hands, an elder advising, do not scrape as if you are lifting mud from a boat. Coax, as if smoothing wrinkles from a reed mat. You have tried both and found that the elder's way leaves the tongue calm instead of sulking, so you coax. The tongue answers by losing its morning grain and keeping only its strength. You add a pinch of natron to the rinse for a single pass. The wad takes on a faint grit and a brighter taste, clean as fresh-washed stone. You are careful. A breath too eager for harshness becomes a breath that hides. The natron wakes the surface without scolding it, and you stop after a few strokes, as you always do. Restraint is its own sweetness. Another small, odd claim surfaces told by a boatman who spends more nights on water than on land that a papyrus wad kept overnight in the cool neck of a water jar learns the jar's chill and gives it back to the tongue at dawn, shocking the mouth into crispness. You tried it once out of curiosity. The wad was indeed pleasantly cool, and for a moment your breath felt like morning wind slipping under a door. Whether that is a trick worth repeating or simply a story worth keeping, you have not decided. You finish by folding the pad into a tidy square and pressing it lightly against the tongue's center, holding it there while you breathe through your nose and count to the span of a slow verse. When you lift the pad away, the tongue feels neat, like a courtyard just swept and watered. You spit into the dust, and the earth accepts the offering without opinion. A last uncertainty strolls by like a scholar in a shade walk. Did people scent the wad itself with a drop of oil? Or would that undo the purpose by leaving a film behind? Small bottles of perfumed oil sit near many basins, and some hands cannot resist adding fragrance wherever water goes. Your own hand hesitates, then declines. The room for sweetness will come later with seeds and resin. For now, clean is enough. You squeeze the pad one final time. Watch a single drop fall into the bowl. Then set the wad aside on a shard of broken pottery to dry in the sun. Later, it will be thrown away without ceremony. One small tool among many that carry a day forward and then vanish. You rinse your mouth with 2 small mouthfuls of water, drawing them over the tongue and teeth, letting the last traces of reed and natron drift away. When you close your lips and breathe, the breath that returns is quiet and undecorated, not scented, not sweet, simply untroubled. The sun climbs a finger's width higher on the wall. On the far bank, a line of palms wavers in heat already forming itself from the future. You press your tongue lightly to the roof of your mouth and feel the smoothness there. It is a modest triumph, and it is yours. You drift toward the temple quarter with the same slow purpose you give to all morning chores. Your steps light on the stone where countless others have already worn a soft path. The air changes before you reach the outer wall. It grows cooler, as if the very idea of shade has a fragrance. And then it grows complicated, a layered breath of resins and herbs warming in bronze. You know the smell. Everyone knows the smell. It is the temple's way of speaking without a voice. At the gate, a guard leans on his spear and watches the lane with a look that is neither stern nor kind. You nod, pass beneath the carved lintel, and enter the courtyard where low braziers glow. The smoke rises in thin, twisting strands. that seem in no hurry to become sky. You stand a little aside so you do not block the way of those who come to offer a handful of grain, a small jar of oil, a folded strip of cloth. The smoke finds you anyway, curling toward your face as if it has an opinion. You breathe it in with a long, steady pull, not greedy, not nervous. The first impression is frankincense bright, lemon sweet, with a pepper edge that clears space behind the eyes. Under it is myrrh, darker and more thoughtful, and then something rounder that might be juniper or pine, or the memory of something dried and then warmed again. The scent moves across your tongue as if it has weight. It lays a veil over yesterday's onion and this morning's natron and declares a small peace. A mainstream certainty settles comfortably here. Incense stood at the center of temple life. Offerings were made with smoke. Prayers stitched themselves to rising threads, and the sweetening of the air was as much a daily task as the sweeping of floors. Recipes for temple perfumes survive in later writings, the famous kyphi among them, listing resins, woods, fruits, and wine cooked into pastes and rolled into pellets for the brazier. The names differ by scribe and season, but the practice is solid. Smoke was a language, and the gods understood it. You move closer to one brazier where a priest's assistant tends the coals with a careful hand. He does not look at you, he does not need to, but he leans the ladle a touch so the resin mingles with a few crumbled petals before it drops. The smoke shifts, grows soft at the edges, and you taste honey where there is none. A trick your mouth plays when warmed resin meets memory. You hold the breath in your chest for a moment, then let it out slowly. The release feels like rinsing without water. A fringe tidbit comes to you from a talkative cousin who once carried jars in a temple store. It is said that if you stand just so to the side of a brazier where the smoke thins to a thread and breathe through pursed lips as if sipping, the scent clings to the mouth longer, lining the teeth with an invisible sweetness. He claims some priests did this before speaking a blessing, so their words would travel on pleasant air. Whether that is true or simply a detail invented by a cousin who admired priests more than he admitted, you cannot test. Still, you find yourself shaping your mouth the way he described. The smoke arrives as promised, delicate and persuasive. The courtyard sounds keep to the same quiet timbre. Sandaled feet scrape, a broom whispers, a jar lid makes the small, hollow tap of pottery greeting pottery. You watch a woman lay a garland on a low offering table, her hands steady as she adjusts the flowers to face the same direction. She leaves a pinch of resin beside the brazier, not to be burned now but later, folded into the temple's rhythm. The assistant acknowledges it with the slightest tilt of his head. Scholars argue gently over the details that interest them most. The kyphi recipes written in later periods list ingredients with confidence: raisins, wine, honey, frankincense, myrrh, and various aromatic woods, but they disagree in their proportions and methods. Some insist the fruits were soaked in wine and left to age. Others say they were boiled into syrups first. A few add obscure herbs whose names are difficult to match to any plant today. Did different temples guard their own versions as closely as cooks guard family stews? Did household imitations ever truly resemble the temple's smoke? The record answers in fragments and then returns to silence. You stay a while longer, letting the scent anchor itself in your hair and the linen at your collar. The mouth responds in small ways. When you breathe out, the air feels smoother, as if it left the throat wearing a light robe rather than stepping out bare. If there is any lingering roughness at the back of the tongue, the smoke dresses it, not to hide, but to make it presentable. You are not perfumed like a festival guest. You are simply companioned by a smell that belongs to the day as much as the sun does. An elderly man stands near you, eyes half closed, lips moving in a prayer too soft to catch. He holds a twig not unlike your own brushing stick, but he does not use it. He seems content to let the smoke do what it will. A small girl, likely his granddaughter, watches the braziers with concentrated seriousness and then attempts a grown-up inhale, overdoes it, and coughs once, not sharply, but enough to earn a fond pat on the shoulder. The smoke accepts this with the dignity of something used to being misunderstood. You may or may not buy a pinch of resin from the small basket near the exit. Sometimes you do. Sometimes you decide that standing here is enough. Today you take a modest pinch, more out of habit than need, and tuck it in a fold of linen. A little crumb carried home will remind the courtyard to your mouth later, when the air has traded temple perfume for kitchen smells. The guard at the gate does not notice, or perhaps he notices everything and simply chooses to say nothing. As you step back into the brightness beyond the wall, the temple smoke loosens its hand but does not let go. It rides with you for a time, like a shadow that has something to recommend beyond mere shape. The lane is busier now. Someone is bargaining for onions with a seriousness that would suit a treaty. A child carries a bucket that sloshes over her toes, and she laughs at the cold. You adjust your breath to these things, and the smoke adjusts with you. Another uncertainty, pleasant because it does not demand an answer, lingers at the edge of thought. Did common folk come to the temple partly to borrow this scent for their mouths, as you have done? Or is that merely a modern thought peeking in where it does not belong? Texts speak of offerings and petitions, of calendars and rites. They do not say, "I went for my breath," but people are people. And even when the reason is devotion, small comforts are gathered along the way. A mouth that leaves sweeter than it arrived is not a sin against the gods. It is simply one more sign that the day has been looked after. You reach your courtyard with the resin crumbs still tucked in linen, your tongue lying calm beneath the roof of your mouth, your breath traveling out without apology. You set a little water to cool, sweep a patch of dust with 3 unhurried strokes, and sit. The temple's scent thins around you but does not vanish. You close your eyes for a brief measure, and breathe as though counting the braziers by memory. The breath feels tended, and so, for a moment, do you. Near the basin by the courtyard wall, you find a small bundle of mint leaves wrapped in a twist of reed. The leaves are dark at the edges, their green dulled by drying. But when you crush one between your fingers, the scent leaps up sharp and clear, as though it has been hiding in the veins all along. You lift your fingers to your nose and breathe in slowly. The air cools as it enters, carrying the memory of shaded gardens and thin streams trickling between stones. You walk to the low bench and sit, placing a few leaves in a shallow dish. With your thumb you press and twist them against the clay, feeling the delicate crunch break into a soft, damp pulp. The scent grows richer, leaning towards sweetness now, and a faint sting touches your fingertips. You know this flavor well. It is the same cool bite that sits on the breath of traders who chew mint as they speak, turning their words into something bright. A certain fact rests easily here. Mint was known and valued in ancient Egypt, not only for cooking but for fragrance. In gardens near temples and homes of the well-to-do, mint grew alongside other herbs, ready to be cut fresh or dried for later use. In recipes for mouth fresheners, mint appears beside fennel, cinnamon, and honey, each lending its own weight to the blend. The plant's sharpness was as welcome in the mouth as in a bowl of herbs steeped for the sick. You lift a small handful of the crushed leaves to your lips and tuck them between cheek and teeth. At first, the flavor is thin, like the memory of water, but as you press your tongue gently against the leaves, the sharp cool rises and spreads. You breathe in through your nose and out through your mouth, testing the way the air feels as it leaves. Already the warmth from earlier, the hint of temple smoke and natron, is giving way to this clean edge. A fringe tidbit comes from an older woman who sells herbs in the market. She swears that mint chewed at dawn will keep flies from hovering too close to your face. Whether that is because of the scent itself or the way it changes the moisture of your breath, she does not say. You have tried it before on warm days near the river and noticed perhaps fewer flies, or perhaps the wind was in your favor. The story persists because it is worth believing on hot mornings. You chew slowly now, the leaves breaking down into a thin, damp mash that clings briefly to your gums. The coolness is not just a taste, it becomes a sensation in the throat, as if the air inside you has been thinned and freshened. The flavor shifts toward bitter if you chew too long, so you pause, holding the pulp in place, letting it rest against your teeth like a compress. Scholars still wonder whether mint in Egypt was always the same plant we know by that name today. Some descriptions match our spearmint or peppermint, others seem closer to wild herbs that share only a family resemblance. Seeds found in jars do not tell the whole story. Leaves rarely survive in the record except as impressions on ancient mud or faint stains in fabric. Whether the mint you hold is the mint they praised is not certain, but its coolness in your mouth suggests the kinship is close enough. The courtyard begins to warm, sunlight climbing the wall inch by inch. A sparrow drops to the basin's edge, tilts its head, and takes 2 quick sips before darting away. You shift the mint in your mouth to the other side, noting how the flavor wakes again when pressed against fresh gums. You think of conversations you will have later, greetings, small bargains, and how this cool thread will weave itself through your words without calling attention to itself. When the pulp has given all it can, you remove it and set it at the base of a nearby fig tree, where its scent might mingle with the earth for a while. You rinse your mouth with a splash from the basin, letting the water roll over the places where the mint worked. The air that leaves you now feels like it has crossed a shaded garden before it arrives in the world. Another uncertainty lingers in your mind as you sit quietly. Did people chew mint purely for the breath? Or was it folded into small morning rituals of calm before work? Texts and fragments speak of herbs to sweeten the mouth, but they rarely say whether the sweetness was for others or for the self. Perhaps it was both, and perhaps the difference never mattered. You lean back against the wall, eyes half closed, feeling the taste of mint slowly fade but leave behind the coolness it carried. The courtyard smells of sun-warmed clay, reed mat, and a faint echo of crushed leaf on your hands. When you breathe out, the air feels light, as though it does not need to push past anything to be free. On a small shelf near the doorway rests a narrow-necked jar, its stopper sealed with a twist of linen string. You untie it slowly, savoring the soft rasp of fiber against fired clay. The stopper lifts with a faint stickiness, and at once a sweet spiced scent rises, a blend of oil pressed from sesame or moringa seeds, steeped with herbs and resins. You tip the jar just enough to see the golden liquid glint in the morning light. It moves lazily, the way all good oils do, holding the warmth of yesterday's sun. You dip the tip of your smallest finger into the jar. The oil clings, thick but not heavy, and when you raise it to your lips, it carries the faint sparkle of frankincense, the darker note of myrrh, and something green that might be crushed coriander or mint. You press your oiled fingertip to your lips first, then trace it lightly across your teeth. The flavor blooms, both sweet and resinous, and the oil coats the surfaces with a sheen so fine it feels almost like breath itself. A steady historical fact rests here. Oils, scented with resins and herbs, were not only for the skin and hair in ancient Egypt, they were sometimes applied to the lips and mouth as part of personal grooming. Perfumed oils softened the lips against the dry air, and when mixed with aromatic ingredients, they could sweeten the breath for conversation. Records of temple oils and domestic recipes both point to this practice, though with more detail about the perfumes than about the exact use inside the mouth. You close your mouth and press the oil gently between tongue and teeth, letting it move slowly before swallowing the smallest trace. The resin sharpness rides on the oil's smoothness, a pairing that feels deliberate. The taste is rich at first and then settles, leaving a warmth in the throat, like the aftertaste of a good story told beside a brazier. A fringe tidbit comes to mind, the kind whispered between friends who share more laughter than caution, that too much of this oil will make the lips shine so brightly they cannot be ignored. A trick used by those who want a certain person to keep looking at them during a gathering. Whether the oil's true purpose was seduction or simply the pleasantness of well-kept breath, the result is the same. Attention lingers. You add another drop to your fingertip and touch it just behind the front teeth, where the gum curves. The sensation is almost cool at first, then gently warming as the herbs announce themselves. Your tongue follows the line, tracing the oil's path, finding no roughness, only the fine, slick glide that the oil leaves behind. You breathe through your nose, and the scent moves upward, mingling with the faint memory of mint from earlier. Scholars still puzzle over whether such perfumed oils were a luxury for the wealthy, or a treat that ordinary households might prepare in smaller, simpler forms. The oils themselves survive in alabaster jars found in tombs, but these were the finest kinds, perhaps intended more for honor and death than for daily use. Written lists of household goods mention oils, but the notes rarely say if they were plain or scented. It is left to imagination whether you and your neighbors share the same fragrance in your mouths or whether your jar is a quiet extravagance. In the courtyard, the oil's aroma seems to mingle with the day itself. A faint breeze moves across the threshold, carrying dust from the lane and the light, warm smell of drying grain. The oil softens the air inside your mouth, so that even when you breathe out toward the breeze, it feels as though the scent is carried back to you. You replace the stopper, winding the linen string in a familiar knot that will hold until tomorrow. A small drop remains on your fingertip, and rather than waste it, you rub it into the skin beside your nose where the sun has made it dry. The scent lingers there too, a reminder that a single preparation can serve many corners of life. Another uncertainty trails behind the act like a shadow. Was this oil always intended for the breath? Or was that merely one of its incidental uses? Perhaps it began as something for the lips alone, and someone, noticing the pleasantness it left behind, thought to apply it more widely. Or perhaps it was always both a quiet, multi-purpose comfort kept in reach for whatever the day asked. You sit for a while longer, pressing your tongue lightly to your teeth and feeling the smoothness left by the oil. The flavor has grown subtler now, more suggestion than taste, and the air that leaves you carries a softness that even you notice. Across the lane, someone laughs at a remark you cannot hear, and the sound folds easily into the calm of the courtyard. You lean back, letting the oil's work be enough. On a high shelf in the cool corner of the room sits a small jar with a narrow mouth and a stopper that fits as if carved for this one task alone. You bring it down with both hands, careful of the smoothness that comes from years of handling. The jar is unpainted, the clay a quiet, earthy color, and along its shoulder a thumbprint lies fossilized in glaze, the long-vanished potter greeting you across time. You loosen the stopper and tilt the jar toward the light. Inside waits a pale, granular powder that does not quite agree to be one thing. It looks dry as chalk, yet smells faintly of fields and stone. You pinch a little between finger and thumb and hold it close to your nose. Natron declares itself first, that clean, mineral sharpness that recalls fresh-washed linen and chalked thresholds. A smell that is not a smell so much as an idea of clean. Beneath it, a dull green note rises from crushed herbs. No single plant shouting above the rest. Perhaps mint, perhaps coriander seed, perhaps a hint of anise that someone slipped in when the season was right. The mixture feels gritty as sand. It sticks lightly to your skin. A steady fact has a place here. Natron, the naturally occurring salt from dry lakes, served many uses in this land: cleansing, preserving, purifying. It went into washing, into temple rituals, into the keeping of the dead, and into the ordinary work of mouth care. When combined with fragrant herbs, it becomes a simple powder people can pinch and taste to sharpen the breath and settle the tongue. The practice is recorded here and there, not loudly, but with the same calm confidence as a recipe for porridge or a note to mend a mat. You touch the powder to your tongue in a small, careful portion. The first sensation is bright and dry, the way a clean wind feels when it rushes through a narrow doorway. Your tongue protests for half a heartbeat, this is grit, after all, then submits as the dry lifts a little moisture, and the herb notes step forward. The powder melts into thinness and moves across the tongue surface, waking it without stinging. You press your lips together and breathe slowly through your nose. The breath that comes back wears a lighter coat. You tip a little into your palm, add a few drops of water from a shallow dish, and stir with a fingertip until the mixture becomes a thin paste the color of riverbank clay. The scent deepens. You touch the paste to the inside of your cheeks and along the gum line with a light, even sweep, the way a scribe primes a fresh reed for ink. The grit does its quiet work, lifting a film you cannot see, leaving behind the sense of flat, polished stone. You give the back teeth a brief pass, not a scrub, only the gentlest persuasion, and then you hold still, letting the paste sit for a few measured breaths before you rinse. A fringe tidbit attaches itself to the jar's story, the kind murmured at the edges of market chatter. A priest once told a cousin of a neighbor that a secret powder of natron mixed with ground petals from a lotus that blooms near particular temple ponds will make the mouth taste like evening song, and that words spoken after using it carry further, as if the air itself is willing to bear them along. Whether this is priestly playfulness or a scrap of real practice wrapped in mystery, no one can agree. But somewhere along the way, small jars labeled privately as the priest's powder appear in households like yours, assembled from what is at hand and a measure of faith. You rinse with a mouthful of cool water, and the paste leaves quickly, like a guest who knows not to linger. What remains is a sensation more than a flavor, cool at the root of the tongue, calm at the gums, a clean line down the center where the paste lay. You breathe again and find the breath behaves itself. It arrives and departs without clutter. You consider another pinch, then decide the first has done its work. More would be scolding, where simple guidance will do. The courtyard keeps its slow music. A pigeon climbs the sun-warmed wall by hopping, unsure wings half open. A boy in the lane clicks at a donkey that resents all clicks equally. Somewhere, a hand mill turns, its stone voice low and companionable. Your own hands dust the last trace of powder from your fingers into the basin, and the water gathers it without complaint. Here the scholars enter, stroking their chins in pleasant uncertainty. They argue over the herbs most likely to share the jar with natron. Lists from later periods speak of mint and juniper berries, sometimes cinnamon, sometimes fenugreek. Seeds show up more often than leaves in the remains, but seeds preserve better than leaves, so the evidence is a favor giver with a habit of playing favorites. Did households choose according to taste or price, or whatever was drying on a cord in the shade? Did temple storerooms lend their perfumes to the powders of ordinary courtyards? Or did ordinary courtyards teach the tempering of scents to the temples? The record shrugs, and your jar does not mind. You take up a narrow strip of linen, worn, clean, obedient, and run it gently along the inner surfaces of your teeth, inviting any stubbornness to step away. The strip comes back with the faintest tint, no more than a rumor. You rinse once more. The natron's brightness leaves behind a slate-smooth calm. Your tongue tests each tooth and finds little to say. You set the jar on the table and look into it again. The powder holds the shallow finger trough of your pinch like a small moon crater. You smooth it with the stopper's end and add one more scrape of crushed herb from a separate bowl, a pinch of fennel you pounded last week and forgot to use. The scent lifts, and the jar becomes newly itself, equal parts stone and leaf. You tie the stopper with a fresh linen thread, pleased by the neatness of knots. Another small tale clings to the edges of memory passed along by an old boatman who swore he learned it upstream. If the powder is mixed with a drop of wine left from a night's libation and allowed to dry again under the moon's eye, it takes on the moon's patience. He said it sweetens anger before it forms and makes a mouth slow to speak unkindness. You have no measure for such a claim. Once, you did let a paste dry by moonlight on a pottery shard, mostly to see if the shard would look different in the morning. It did not. But when you used the powder later, your temper was even, and the boatman's promise turned into a pleasant association you have not bothered to undo. You sit back and simply breathe for a while, as if testing the air for an audience you do not expect. There is no audience here, only the cat already half asleep on the warm threshold, the reed mat cooling where the shadow advances, the smell of grain from a neighbor's basket. The breath that leaves you carries none of last night's stew, none of the fatigue that sometimes makes mornings taste like old coins. It carries only the near silence of minerals and the softened echo of herbs. You wonder briefly whether the powder is meant more for mornings like this, or for afternoons when the mouth has told too many prices and swallowed too much dust. The jar answers by being ready at either hour. You touch its shoulder once in thanks and place it back on its shelf in the cool. It disappears into its corner the way steady tools do, unremarkable until the day reaches for them and finds them where they belong. One last uncertainty passes and leaves its shadow. Did certain households give their powders names, as cooks name their favorite pots? Did someone joke, "Bring me the priest's sand," or pass the quiet salt? No fragment keeps such a jest for you, and perhaps none ever will. But the thought pleases, and so you let it linger, a soft flavor at the edge of the mind. You wet your lips, feel the smoothness along your teeth, and breathe. The mouth feels undecorated and proper, like a swept threshold at first light. You move on to the next small task of the day with the powder's clean temper sitting behind your words, light as a reed pen resting in its holder, waiting for whatever line comes next. The lane between your courtyard and the baker's oven is still shaded, though the day has begun to thicken with heat. You walk slowly, not out of laziness, but to let the air keep its coolness on your skin for a few breaths longer. The scent of bread meets you halfway, not yet the full, deep smell of baked loaves, but the warm, rising note of dough that has just begun to swell against the oven's heat. It mixes with the faint sweetness of dates drying on a mat outside someone's doorway. You pass through the low arch into the baker's yard. Here, long wooden boards rest on trestles, each carrying small, neat rows of offerings prepared for the temple. On one board, the loaves are plain, shaped with a ridge down the center. On another, they are decorated with a single pressed date, the fruit's glossy skin catching the sun. You step closer and notice that a few boards hold more than bread. Small plates of figs, bowls of lentils, and shallow trays of dried herbs, all meant to be placed before a shrine. It is these herbs, not the bread, that draw your breath deeper. The air above them is rich with a warm green smell, crushed coriander, a scattering of fennel, and a thread of something almost floral. You breathe it in without ceremony, letting the fragrance weave through the cooler taste the natron left in your mouth earlier. The result is unexpectedly sweet, like the quiet harmony of two notes played together by accident. A well-grounded fact rests here. Food offerings were a daily presence in temples, and their aroma was not lost on the people who brought them. Dates, bread, beer, figs, and herbs all carried scents that could linger in the mouth simply from being nearby. While meant for the gods, they often shaped the air for mortals as well, especially those tasked with carrying or arranging them. A fringe tidbit comes from a neighbor who once worked in a temple kitchen. She claimed that on festival mornings she would stand very close to the table of offerings before they were carried in, breathing deeply so that the scent of dates and coriander would rest in her mouth for hours, as if the gods had shared their breakfast. She laughed when she said it, but her tone held the memory like a prized possession. You linger now near a tray of figs, their skins slightly wrinkled from drying but still sticky with sugar. The smell is thick and almost wine-like. Without touching them, you let the scent rise to your face, tasting the air in slow, careful pulls. Your tongue seems to press against the back of your teeth without meaning to, as though holding the flavor in place. A priest's assistant emerges from the doorway with a bundle of reeds, nodding as he passes. He pauses at the trays, lifts a small pinch of herbs between his fingers, and scatters it onto one of the bread loaves. The motion is quick but careful, as though the gesture matters as much as the herb itself. He moves on without speaking. The scent, now warmed by the fresh touch of his hand, swirls a little higher into the air, and you breathe again, slower this time. Scholars still debate whether ordinary people were encouraged to breathe in the temple offerings or to keep a respectful distance. No text says plainly, "Stand here and enjoy the aroma." Yet the physical arrangement of courtyards and offering tables often placed them where passers-by could not help but notice. Was this accident or design? Did the gods mind if their scents were borrowed from mortal mouths? The record keeps its secrets, and you are left to make your own quiet borrowings. You move to the far side of the yard, where a shaded bench sits against the wall. From here, you can watch as the trays are inspected, adjusted, and eventually carried inside. Each movement stirs the air, sending thin threads of scent toward you. You breathe them in and let them settle, the way a reed mat takes the pattern of whatever lies beneath it. As the loaves disappear one by one into the temple's shadow, the yard grows quieter. The sun pushes its way across the bench until it brushes your knee, and you take that as your cue to stand. Your mouth still holds a faint sweetness, the kind that does not demand notice but reveals itself when you speak or smile. You step back into the lane, the scent fading but not gone. Somewhere behind you, the baker calls to someone in the next yard, and the rhythm of his voice carries the same calm as the work you have just witnessed, unhurried, steady, and certain that the day will provide its own small gifts without asking. The smell of roasted barley reaches you before you even round the corner into the grain seller's stall. It is a deep, nutty aroma, warm but not sharp, the kind of scent that sits low in the air and spreads itself slowly, like sunlight on a floor. The merchant is bent over a shallow bronze pan, stirring with a flat wooden paddle. Each turn of his wrist rolls the barley grains against one another, and you can hear the soft, dry hiss of their movement. He glances up when you enter, lifting the paddle in greeting without pausing his work. The heat from the pan drifts toward you, carrying the barley's fragrance directly to your mouth. You inhale, and the warmth fills your nose before it touches your tongue. The air tastes faintly sweet, as if the grain has been hiding a trace of honey all along and has decided to let it out now. here, in the middle of the morning. A steady fact anchors this moment. Roasted grains were not only food but also a casual means to freshen the mouth in ancient Egypt. Chewed warm, they released oils and sweetness that could soften stale breath and coat the tongue. Barley, in particular, was valued for its ready availability and its ability to satisfy hunger in small amounts, making it a portable comfort for laborers and travelers alike. You accept a small scoop of the still warm barley from the merchant's hand, cupping it carefully. The grains are dry and firm at first, clicking softly against your teeth as you bite down. With each chew, the dry gives way to a mild oiliness, and the flavor deepens into something both toasty and faintly floral. Your mouth grows warmer, the grain's heat lingering, as though it has settled into your breath itself. A fringe tidbit comes from an older cousin, who swears that barley roasted with a pinch of coriander seed not only sweetens the breath, but sharpens the mind before bargaining in the market. It puts a brightness on your tongue and in your thoughts, he says, and though you suspect the brightness is more confidence than magic, you have tried it often enough to admit there may be something to it. The merchant continues stirring his pan, the paddle moving in a rhythm as steady as the Nile's current. Now and then, a grain leaps free and lands on the worn wooden counter. He gathers them with his palm and returns them to the heat without breaking his pattern. The scent around you grows richer, and you feel yourself breathing deeper without thinking, as though you could store the smell and call on it later. Scholars still puzzle over whether roasted barley for the breath was a common habit among all people, or one more likely to be found among merchants and travelers. Archaeological finds confirm barley's presence in nearly every household, but its role as a breath freshener appears more often in casual references than in formal lists. Perhaps it was too ordinary to record in detail, or perhaps its usefulness was simply assumed. You chew slowly, letting the roasted flavor coat your tongue. The warmth seems to smooth over the faint mineral sharpness left from the natron earlier, blending the day's small mouth rituals into a single, gentle tone. When you swallow, the aftertaste lingers a soft, grainy sweetness that feels both familiar and complete. The merchant offers you a small pouch of cooled barley to take home. You decline for now, preferring to remember the taste fresh from the pan. He nods as if understanding and returns to his steady turning, the barley rolling like small, patient beads under his paddle. As you leave the stall, the warmth in your mouth feels like it has settled in for the day, not loud or perfumed, but present in the way a well-worn mat is present underfoot, known, trusted, and easily forgotten until it is gone. You breathe out into the lane, and the air that returns to you carries a quiet echo of the grain, enough to make you think the morning has been well tended. At the far end of the lane, a low table sits in the shadow of a fig tree. On it, a shallow basket holds a small pile of citron fruits, larger than lemons, their skins thick and dimpled, the yellow softened by a greenish cast. They are not common in every household. Their presence here feels deliberate, as though someone brought them in from another garden or a trader's boat. The air around the basket carries a faint citrus scent, sharper than the sweet smell of figs overhead, but less piercing than vinegar. You pick one up. The skin feels heavy for its size, the weight telling you the pith inside will be thick and stubborn. You score it gently with a small reed-handled knife, releasing an immediate spray of oils that clings to your fingers. The smell brightens at once, cutting through the warmth of the day and settling into your nose like a clean line drawn across a page. A well-settled fact holds here. Ancient Egyptians knew and used citron likely through contact with traders from the Levant, and valued its rind for medicinal and aromatic purposes. While not as common as local herbs, the peel's sharp bitterness and lasting scent made it a candidate for breath freshening, especially among those who could afford the occasional imported treat. You cut a narrow strip of peel, thick with pith, and bring it to your mouth. The first bite is bitter, even a little astringent, and your tongue hesitates before pushing forward. But as you chew, the bitterness thins, giving way to a floral note that clings to your teeth and lingers in the back of your throat. You breathe out slowly, and the air that leaves you feels lighter, almost cooled, even though no mint has passed your lips. A fringe tidbit comes from a fisherman you once met at the docks. He claimed that chewing citron peel before a long day at sea kept the mouth from tasting too much of salt, and that the gods of the river favored those whose breath smelled of green sun. Whether the gods notice or not, the image is pleasant, and you keep it with you each time you taste the peel. The fig tree overhead rustles as a light breeze moves through, and one or two ripe fruits drop into the grass with a soft thud. You ignore them for now, focusing on the slow breakdown of the peel in your mouth. The pith softens under steady chewing, the oil seeping out in waves that alternate between sharp and mellow. Your tongue moves it from side to side, making sure each part of your mouth has its share. Scholars still argue over whether citron was eaten raw this way or only used in cooked or infused preparations. Some fragments suggest its peel was candied in honey, others that it was soaked in wine before being chewed. A few recipes mention citron alongside pomegranate seeds in mixtures meant to brighten the mouth, though none explain exactly how. Was the bitterness a challenge to be endured for the sake of the reward, or part of the pleasure itself? No one can say for certain. You chew a little longer, then spit the softened remains into the grass under the fig tree. The taste stays, not as a solid flavor now, but as a brightness that drifts at the edge of every breath. Your lips carry a faint tang, and you run your tongue along them before wiping your hands on the edge of your tunic. The citron's oil leaves your fingertips fragrant for a while, so that every absent-minded gesture brings it back to your nose. In the lane, the sun has shifted just enough to light the top of the basket, making the remaining citrons glow softly against the shadow. You leave them there, a gift to the afternoon. The fig tree sways again, and the basket's scent mingles with the sweetness of fallen fruit, a reminder that the day will always carry more flavors than you can hold at once. When you breathe now, the air feels touched with green, not the soft green of herbs, but the sharper green of something plucked from far away and brought here to wake the mouth. You let it stay as it is, knowing it will fade before evening, but content to carry it for as long as it chooses. Along the road leading toward the caravan square, you meet a man guiding two camels heavy with baskets. His head is wrapped against the sun, and his eyes are shaded by the cloth, so only a sliver of expression shows. He slows as you pass, lifting one hand in greeting, and you notice the small pouch tied at his belt, not the kind for coin, but for something lighter, almost weightless. He unties the pouch's drawstring and tips a small lump into his palm. It glistens faintly in the sunlight, honey darkened with flecks of ground coriander seed. He holds it out to you with a brief nod, the unspoken offer of something shared among travelers. You take it, feeling the tacky weight of the lump between your fingers. It is soft enough to dent but holds its shape, the seeds trapped in amber light. You place it in your mouth, and the honey melts almost at once, spreading a deep, rich sweetness across your tongue. The coriander rises slowly, its scent warm and citrus-like, drifting up into your nose with each breath. The seeds add a faint crunch, releasing a second wave of flavor that mingles with the honey's weight. Your teeth sink through them, and for a moment the taste is sharper, then softer again, as though the two flavors are taking turns speaking. A steady fact finds its place here. Coriander was widely used in ancient Egypt, valued for both its culinary and aromatic properties. Seeds appear in tombs, recipes, and medicinal notes, sometimes paired with honey as a remedy for the stomach or the breath. The combination's sweetness and spice could mask less welcome scents and leave the mouth feeling dressed in a quiet perfume. The camel driver chews his own lump slowly, gazing ahead with the patience of one who spends many hours on the road. He swallows, then offers a second story, a fringe tidbit learned from another traveler who swore that honey mixed with coriander not only freshened the breath, but softened the voice for singing. You could charm a caravan to walk faster if you began the song after chewing this, he says, the corners of his eyes creasing in what might be a smile. You imagine a line of camels marching in rhythm to a voice sweetened by seeds, and the picture amuses you. You walk together for a short while, the camel's bells marking a slow beat. The honey in your mouth thins into a golden film, clinging to your teeth and gums so that every movement of the tongue renews its flavor. The coriander's brightness lingers in the throat, keeping the sweetness from becoming heavy. Scholars still discuss whether such mixtures were prepared at home or bought from market sellers who specialized in small edible remedies. Some suggest that temple kitchens might have made them for ceremonial use, the combination offered to priests before long recitations. Others think They were the everyday invention of travelers like this man, portable, long-lasting, and pleasant enough to share. The truth, as so often, likely shifts between the two. When the road forks, the camel driver turns toward the desert path. He offers you another lump from his pouch, but you decline with thanks. One is enough for now, and better to let its flavor fade slowly. You watch him go until the camels and their bells vanish into the bright horizon. You step into the shade of a nearby wall, pressing your tongue against your teeth to feel the smoothness the honey has left. The coriander's echo is still there, faint but insistent, a reminder of the short company you kept. When you breathe out, the air feels warm and spiced, as though it has carried a little of the caravan with it. The lane ahead smells of dust and baking clay, but the taste in your mouth is still sweet, holding back the harsher edges of the day. You walk on, thinking of how a single lump from a stranger's pouch can change the air you carry inside you, at least for a little while. In the courtyard of a neighbor's house, a wide-mouthed water jar rests in a shallow pit lined with palm fronds. The air here is cooler, the shade deep enough that the sun's edge barely grazes the rim. The jar's sides are damp, tiny beads of moisture collecting where the porous clay lets the water breathe. You approach slowly, not out of hesitation, but to let the coolness meet you before you touch it. The neighbor waves from a low stool, gesturing toward the jar in silent invitation. You step closer and lean over the opening. A faint, earthy scent rises, mixed with the green breath of the fronds around it. You can see your reflection in the still surface, dim and softened by the shadows. The water waits without movement, as if it has been listening for you. A settled fact fits here easily. Cooling water in shaded pits or partially buried jars was a common practice in ancient Egypt. The slow evaporation through porous clay lowered the temperature of the contents, making the water not only more pleasant to drink, but also fresher on the mouth. When used for rinsing, it could bring a sudden clarity to breath that no herb or resin could match. You dip a small cup into the jar, careful not to disturb the surface more than necessary. The first sip is slow. The water touches your lips, and then your tongue with a chill that surprises you even though you expected it. You hold it there, rolling it gently along the teeth, letting the cool seep into every corner. The flavor is clean but not empty. It carries a whisper of the clay and the faintest trace of something green from the fronds. A fringed tidbit surfaces in memory. An older man in the market once claimed that if you held such cool water in your mouth for the length of one slow verse, the freshness would stay with you until the sun dipped low again. Whether this is true, or simply the way he encouraged himself to slow down when drinking, you have found it pleasant enough to try. You fill your mouth again, this time resisting the urge to swallow. The water's coolness presses outward against your cheeks, as though it wants to escape but agrees to wait. You breathe carefully through your nose, feeling the cool radiate into the passages above. When at last you swallow, the sensation lingers, not as sharpness, but as a wide, quiet clarity. Scholars sometimes note the presence of such jars in both humble homes and grand courtyards, pointing out that the technique changes little with status. A jar is a jar, a pit is a pit, and the principle is the same. What varies is what else the water carries. A sprig of mint dropped in for scent, a sliver of citrus peel, or nothing but the clean touch of clay and shadow. In your neighbor's jar, it seems, the choice is simplicity itself. You take one last drink, swishing the water slowly, so it passes between each tooth before swallowing. The mouth feels newly washed, not just in flavor but in temperature, as if the heat has been set aside for a time. The neighbor smiles faintly from his stool, perhaps knowing without asking that the jar has done its work. You hand the cup back, wipe your lips with the back of your hand, and step back into the lane. The sun greets you more directly here, but the freshness you carry makes it easier to bear. Your breath feels lighter, cooler, and the air that leaves you now seems as if it has crossed a shaded river before stepping into the day. You sit beneath the small awning of an elder's house, the woven reeds above your head muting the sun into a gentle glow. She is already there, leaning on one elbow, sorting a small pile of roots into two baskets. Some are pale and fibrous, others dark and knotted. She motions for you to come closer without breaking her rhythm. From the smaller basket, she lifts a long, pale root and slices away its thin skin with a worn bronze blade. The air fills with a faint, watery scent, like the smell of river mud after rain. She hands you a slice no thicker than a fingernail. Lotus root, she says softly, as though the plant itself is listening, for a calmer breath. A certain fact stands steady here. Lotus was more than a flower to the ancient Egyptians. Its seeds, roots, and blossoms appeared in food, medicine, and ritual. Though most often linked to religious symbolism and temple art, its parts were also consumed for their scent and flavor, and some recipes speak of chewing lotus root for the mouth. The crisp texture and mild sweetness could settle strong tastes left from earlier meals. You place the slice in your mouth. The first bite is crisp, almost like biting into cool cucumber. A faint sweetness appears, carrying the ghost of the flower's perfume. You chew slowly, letting the juice coat your tongue and teeth. The flavor is gentle, not forceful. It feels more like water finding its way into small cracks than like spice or resin announcing itself. A fringe tidbit, she tells you now. If you chew it at dusk, the breath it leaves will keep away quarrels at the evening table. She smiles at her own words, and you cannot tell whether she is speaking from experience or from a story passed down the lane. Either way, the thought is pleasant, a food that can quiet both mouth and mood. You chew the root to softness, feeling its fibers give way without resistance. The taste does not grow bitter. It simply fades into a light freshness that hovers in the background of each breath. Your teeth meet without grit. Your tongue rests without complaint. You swallow the last of the root and accept another slice, this one a little thicker, to prolong the calm it brings. Scholars still wonder whether chewing lotus root for the breath was a common household habit or something reserved for those with easier access to temple ponds and well-tended gardens. Seeds appear more often in the archaeological record, being easier to store and transport, but references to the root are scattered and uncertain. Some suspect its role in mouth care was more informal, a small luxury enjoyed when available rather than a staple ritual. The elder finishes sorting her baskets and sets the knife aside. She chews a slice herself, her jaw moving slowly as she watches the lane. Two children run past, their laughter carrying with the wind, and for a moment the air seems lighter than before. She glances at you, as if to say, "You see?" without speaking the words. You rinse your mouth with a swallow of cool water from a nearby jar. The lotus root's mild perfume lingers, not enough to be obvious, but enough that you notice it when the breeze returns from the river. It feels as though the breath has been wrapped in a thin cloth, softening its edges without changing its shape. You thank the elder, and she waves you away with the same motion she used to sort her roots, already turning back to her work. As you step into the lane, the world scents return: dust, cooking grain, the faint salt of drying fish, but they do not settle heavily. The lotus has left you lighter, as though the air now finds your mouth a friendlier place to pass through. By the riverbank, a narrow wooden boat waits with its rope looped over a worn post. The boatman sits cross-legged near the bow, mending a coil of net. His hands move with the rhythm of someone who has tied these knots since childhood. Twist, pull, tighten, smooth, without once looking down. Beside him, a small basket rests, the lid held in place by a stone. When you approach, he lifts the lid and offers you a handful of tiny dark brown seeds. They are glossy, oval, and smell faintly of licorice when you bring them close to your nose. "Anise," he says, as if the name itself should explain everything. He tips a few into his own mouth and begins to chew, slow and steady, letting the flavor rise. You follow his example. The first bite releases a soft sweetness that blooms into the unmistakable cool warmth of anise, both sharp and smooth, like mint crossed with spice. The seeds crack between your teeth, and the flavor strengthens with each crush, moving up into your nose and down into your throat. The river air seems to take the taste and carry it back to you. A firm fact belongs here. Anise was well known in ancient Egypt, valued for its medicinal and aromatic qualities. Chewing its seeds not only freshened the breath, but was believed to ease digestion. Written lists from temple storerooms and household accounts mention anise among herbs for both kitchen and mouth, suggesting it was common enough to be used daily when available. The boatman hums a low, tuneless sound as he works, and the anise makes his breath faintly sweet, even from where you sit. He tells you a fringe tidbit without looking up. If you chew anise before speaking to someone across the water, the wind will carry your words more kindly. You are not sure whether he means the flavor improves the voice, or whether the river simply prefers certain scents. But you nod as though you believe him. The seeds grow softer, breaking into fine grit that releases their oil more quickly now. The flavor is deep but not overpowering, the kind that lingers politely instead of clinging. You swallow the small fragments, and the sweetness remains, as if the seeds have left their shadow behind in your mouth. Scholars still debate whether anise in ancient Egypt was identical to the variety most familiar today, or whether it was a related plant with a slightly different flavor. The seeds recovered from sites are few, often too degraded to tell the difference clearly. Descriptions in texts match what you taste now, but there is room for uncertainty, as there always is when the past offers only fragments. The boatman sets his net aside and picks up his oar, pushing the boat gently into the current. You step in and sit near the stern, feeling the subtle sway beneath you as the water takes hold. The smell of the river, green, muddy, alive, blends with the sweet sharpness of the anise in your mouth. It is an odd pairing at first, but then it becomes familiar, like two neighbors speaking in different tones about the same weather. The boat glides along the bank, the water making its soft, constant sounds against the hull. You breathe out toward the reeds and imagine the anise scent moving through their thin leaves, whether the wind carries it across the water or not. It feels like it belongs here, as much a part of the river's morning as the herons standing in the shallows or the fish that scatter at the oar's touch. When you return to shore, the basket of seeds is offered again. You take only 2 more, tucking them into your cheek to draw out their sweetness through the walk home. The flavor will fade slowly, but the calm it leaves light, clean, and faintly spiced will carry through the rest of the morning. The sun is higher now, and the streets feel narrower for the heat they hold. You step into a shaded garden behind a friend's house, where fig trees lean toward one another as though trading secrets. The air here is thick with their perfume, ripe fruit, green leaves, and the faint smell of sap from a branch trimmed earlier in the week. Your friend sits cross-legged on a low stool, a shallow woven tray balanced on her knees. On it, a small pile of figs waits, their skins ranging from deep purple to dusty green. She cuts one open with a short, curved knife, and the inside glows red in the filtered light, the seeds set in a sticky amber flesh. She hands it to you without ceremony. A certain fact rests comfortably here. Figs were a common and favored fruit in ancient Egypt, eaten fresh or dried, valued for their sweetness and easy cultivation. Beyond nourishment, their natural sugars and mild acidity made them useful for coating the mouth, softening harsher flavors, and leaving the breath scented faintly with their perfume. You bite into the fig, and the seeds crack softly between your teeth. The flesh is warm from the air, and its sweetness is immediate, almost floral. You chew slowly, letting the juice coat your tongue and teeth. The small crunch of seeds repeats with each bite, the sound muted but present, like walking on fine gravel. A fringe tidbit your friend offers as you eat. If you eat a fig before speaking to someone you wish to impress, your words will stick to their ears, like the seeds stick to your teeth. She laughs as she says it, brushing her own teeth with her tongue. Whether she means the sweetness will charm them or simply that they will be distracted by the seeds, you cannot tell. The shade deepens as a breeze stirs the fig leaves, their broad faces shifting to reveal lighter undersides. The scent in the garden swells and settles again, each movement carrying the faint, earthy undertone of the soil. You finish the fig and take another, this one smaller and firmer. The flavor is less intense, but still sweet enough to coat your breath in a soft veil. Scholars note the fig's presence in offerings, in household records, and in countless tomb paintings. What they still debate is whether the fruit's role in freshening the breath was widely recognized, or simply a happy side effect of its popularity. Few texts mention it directly, but the logic is easy. Sweet, fragrant food leaves a sweet, fragrant trace. You eat a third fig more slowly, pressing the flesh against the roof of your mouth to release every bit of juice. The seeds cling to the gaps between your teeth, and while some might find this troublesome, you find it part of the charm. Their tiny, nutty taste lingers even after the flesh is gone. Your friend pours a small cup of cool water from a jar shaded by the wall. You sip it, and the fig's sweetness mingles with the water's clean taste, making both feel richer. When you breathe out, the air carries a faint perfume, as if the garden itself is now part of your breath. The breeze lifts again, and a ripe fig falls into the grass with a soft sound. You leave it there, knowing it will be claimed by birds before long. The garden holds its peace, and your mouth holds its sweetness, each content to linger in its own quiet way. By midday, the heat has gathered itself into a heavy shawl around the streets, and even the market stalls speak in quieter voices. You step into the shade of a palm-thatched awning where a clay jar sits open on a low table. The smell that rises from it is faintly sour, with a note of ferment beneath, not unpleasant, but alive in a way that catches your attention. The man behind the table pours a ladleful into a small cup and gestures for you to try. The liquid is pale and cloudy, cool from the shade. You know it before you drink. Palm wine, drawn fresh and left to rest, only briefly. You lift the cup and take a slow mouthful, holding it before swallowing. The first impression is sharp, the tang curling around the edges of your tongue. Then comes a faint sweetness, quick to arrive and just as quick to fade, leaving a clean, cool echo in its place. A certain fact anchors the moment. Palm wine was known and enjoyed in ancient Egypt, often consumed fresh before its ferment grew too strong. In small sips, it could be used to rinse the mouth, the mild acidity cutting through lingering flavors from food or the day's dust. It was both drink and cleanser, carrying a brightness that water alone sometimes lacked. You tilt the cup again and swish the liquid slowly, feeling it move between your teeth. The slight fizz lifts the breath in your throat, and when you swallow, it leaves a faint tingle behind. The sourness sharpens your awareness of the air, making the next inhale feel cooler than it is. A fringe tidbit comes to mind, one told by a laughing seller in another market, that a sip of palm wine before speaking to a superior would make your voice sound more honest, because nothing sour can hide behind sweetness. Whether this is a superstition or simply the seller's way of encouraging more customers to drink, it lingers in your thoughts as you take another careful sip. You finish the small cup and set it on the table. The man refills it halfway, but you wave him off with a smile. A little is enough. Too much, and the warmth of the wine would overtake the freshness it brings. Scholars debate whether rinsing with palm wine was a deliberate practice or just a side effect of drinking it slowly. Some sources suggest it was mixed with herbs or honey for ceremonial use, while others describe it as an everyday refreshment with no special ritual attached. The truth likely rests somewhere in between a drink that could be ordinary or elevated, depending on the occasion. You step back into the lane, the sun pressing close again, yet your mouth still holds the cool bite of the wine, a quiet resistance to the heat. You breathe out, and the air carries a faint, sour-sweet trace that feels cleaner than before. The world moves at a slower pace in the heat. A boy dozes on a mat, one hand resting on a basket of pomegranates. A woman fans herself with a strip of woven reed, each motion deliberate and without urgency. You walk among them with a mouth that feels light, as though rinsed in something borrowed from the shade. Down by the mooring posts where the river quiets around a curve, a fisherman squats beside a low basket, spreading his net to dry. The sun lies flat on the water, and the wet cords steam faintly where they meet the light. He looks up as you approach and nudges a small wooden bowl toward you with the back of his knuckles. Inside lies a handful of coarse, pale crystals, irregular as broken shells. The bowl smells of wood and the faint, clean sting of minerals. You take a pinch between finger and thumb. The grains are angular, each one catching a glint of light before settling again in your palm. He nods as if to say, "Go on," and you understand the invitation. You lift the pinch to your mouth and, with care, scatter the salt along your gums, touching the inner curve first, then the outer, the way a scribe might dust sand across drying ink to set it. The first contact is bright, not flavor alone, but a whole sensation as if the mouth has been reminded of the sea without ever leaving the river. You press your lips together and breathe through your nose. The salt wakes the gums at once. A small ache arrives, not painful, but attentive, and saliva answers in a cooling rush that loosens the morning's quiet weight. With the tip of your tongue, you guide the crystals gently, letting them rest a heartbeat at the front teeth where heaviness tends to linger, then along the molars where they grind to a thin grit. You do not hurry. This is not a scrub. It is arousing, coaxing the mouth to remember itself. A steady fact belongs here. In this land, salt, whether scooped from lake beds, traded from the sea, or gathered through the work of boiling and drying, stood among common cleansers. Like natron, it served to purify, to dry what was too wet, and to sweeten what had grown stale. Mixed into pastes or used as bare crystals, salt touched skin, vessels, even offerings. For the mouth, a small rubbing followed by a rinse leaves a clean, brief brightness that water alone sometimes cannot give. You take a sip from the boatman's gourd, not to swallow yet, but to wet the salt where it rests. The crystals soften into edges that move more willingly, and as you roll the water along them, they melt into a thin brine. The taste sharpens, then thins, a tide that rises and withdraws within the space of a breath. You let most of it fall from your lips, a clear thread that darkens the sand. The fisherman's net clicks softly as the cords settle on the reeds. He offers a fringed tidbit as if passing along a hook well tested. Rub the salt when the sun is just a spear's length above the water, he says, lifting his chin toward the bright edge of morning, and no river spirit will sour your voice before noon. He adds, half smiling, that the same trick keeps a quarrel from forming in the throat. You do not ask how a quarrel forms in the throat. You have felt it before a heat that rises and needs only a word to become itself. Whether salt cools that heat or merely delays it, the tidbit pleases. You wet your fingers again and touch the last few crystals to the upper gum where it meets the lip, then to the lower, tracing a slow circle. The sensation is clearer now, a clean prickling, a wakefulness. Your tongue moves over the teeth and finds the surfaces plain and calm, as if the small grains have smoothed what they could and scolded nothing. The river offers a thin breeze, and when you breathe out, the air that returns to you is simple mineral, cool at the edges, without perfume and without weight. The fisherman lifts the bowl toward the light so you can see the different sizes of the grains, some large as barley kernels, some fine as ground chalk, a few tinged faintly brown from the wood of the bowl. Coarse first, he says, fine last. You follow his order, rubbing a dusting of the smaller crystals along the line where tooth meets tooth. They vanish almost as soon as they arrive, leaving only their idea behind. Scholars lean in at this point and puzzle over details the river will not surrender. Did households keep common salt and natron side by side for the mouth, choosing by mood and season? Did fishermen favor raw crystals because the water was already at hand, while town dwellers preferred powders mixed in little jars? Surviving lists mention salts for many tasks, but the lines between natron and other salts blur. Some fragments use names that trade places depending on who holds the reed. The uncertainty remains tidy, polite, willing to sit beside your bowl without insisting on an answer. You swish once more, this time with water dipped straight from the river, and let stand to clear. It tastes of green and stone and the faintest ghost of fish, but the salt steadies it, and together they pass through your mouth like a curtain lifted and set back again. You spit carefully into the damp sand, away from the net and the basket. The fisherman, who has been watching the weave of the cords, as if they might alter themselves if ignored, glances up only long enough to see that you are finished. He nods once. The nod means, there, enough. You rinse your fingers and feel the skin tighten as the last of the brine dries. In your mouth, the gums hum softly, like a line of bees far off beyond a field, not sound, but the idea of sound. You touch a fingertip to a front tooth and feel no drag. The tongue lies smooth against the roof. Breath moves out and does not catch on old corners. The river keeps its small song, reed against reed, hull against post, water shushing itself against the bank. A heron steps in measured patience, the world's simplest scribe, writing the same line over and over with its thin legs. The fisherman gathers his net with a final, practiced fold, then sprinkles the smallest pinch of salt into the empty bowl and tips it toward the water as if to thank both at once. You consider the measure of this trick, where it belongs among the day's other small keepings. Mint leaves, honey and resin, grain warmth, temple smoke, all carry a kind of sweetness. Salt does not sweeten. It clears. It pulls the night from the gums and leaves a surface where other flavors can later find a clean landing. You are content to let it do only that. Not every task must end in fragrance. Sometimes clean is a fragrance of its own. Another uncertainty sidles close and sits at your heel like a patient dog. Were there households that avoided salt for the mouth, fearing it harsh or unfriendly to the gums, reserving it only for cooking and preserving? A few medical lines advise caution. Others advise its use. Perhaps it was, like most things, a matter of hand and habit how coarsely it was ground, how long it was left, whether water followed quickly. The past does not deliver a single rule. You live in the space where rules soften into practice. You hand the bowl back to the fisherman. He sets it beneath the stool, out of the sun, and wipes his hands on a strip of reed cloth. You thank him, and he shrugs in the friendly way of men who share what they have without counting it as gift. As you turn to go, he calls after you, rinse again at the next shade. Salt likes a companion. You raise a hand to show you understand. On the path home, you do as he says. A slow mouthful of water in the shadow of a leaning palm, turned gently along the teeth, then released. Your breath answers with a lightness that carries you through the hot patch where the path widens and the stones throw back the sun. When you greet a neighbor at the next doorway, the words leave your mouth as if they have been walking on smooth ground all morning. The afternoon light tilts low enough that the courtyard shadows grow long and the air loses some of its weight. You spread a reed mat in the corner where the breeze from the drying sheds moves most freely. The smell here is unlike the street or the river. It is the scent of reeds themselves, cut and laid in tidy rows, the sun drawing their green into gold. It is dry, but not lifeless. The scent is soft at the edges, like cloth worn smooth over many washings. You lie back with your hands folded loosely over your stomach, letting the mat's texture press faint lines into your skin. Each breath you take carries the faint sweetness of the reeds, a smell you have known since childhood but never fully noticed. It seeps into the mouth slowly, not as a flavor exactly, but as a change in the air's weight. The dryness seems to brush your tongue, pulling away the heaviness that can come in the stillness of a long day. A steady fact fits here. Reed mats were used not only for sleeping and sitting, but for drying herbs, grains, and fish, all things whose scents could mingle with the reeds themselves. Spending time in such air could alter what your breath carried, not with the boldness of spice or resin, but with a subtler cleanliness born of sun and plant. You shift slightly, pressing your cheek against the mat so that your nose is close to its surface. The smell grows stronger here, and a faint bitterness rises from the older reeds woven into its frame. You inhale deeply and let the dryness coat your mouth. It feels like a cleansing without movement, as though the air has been sifted before reaching you. A fringed tidbit drifts from a memory. An old basket maker once claimed that if you rested on a freshly woven mat after it had been in the sun all day, the warmth and scent together would drink the stale air out of your chest and leave you lighter. He demonstrated once, lying with his eyes closed, breathing through his mouth like a man in no hurry to return to the world. Whether the mat truly did the drinking or the act of lying still did the work, it seemed worth repeating. You keep still for several breaths, letting the faint reed dust taste settle into the corners of your mouth. It is not sharp, not sweet, but something between, like the air just before rain, when the ground has warmed but not yet cooled. Your tongue rests easily, your jaw loose, your lips parting slightly so the breeze can move through without resistance. Scholars rarely speak of reed mats in connection with the breath. They appear in inventories and wall paintings as furniture or tools, but not as instruments of mouth care. Yet here, lying in the slow rhythm of the air, it is easy to imagine that people have always known their quiet effect. Some comforts are so common they escape notice until you miss them. The breeze shifts, bringing with it a trace of drying grain from the next courtyard. The reed scent mingles with the grain's faint nutty perfume, and your mouth registers both without effort. The combination is warm and dry, with none of the heaviness that food leaves when eaten. You breathe it in, hold it for a count, and let it go. The release feels like rinsing with something invisible. A pair of doves lands on the wall, their feathers ruffling as they settle. They murmur to each other in low, rolling sounds that seem to match the pace of your breathing. One tilts its head toward the mat, as if curious about why you lie here without moving. You close your eyes and let the scent of reed and sun fill the space where words might be. When at last you sit up, Your mouth feels dry in the best way, not parched, but clean, as though the air has passed through a sieve before it touched you. You run your tongue along your teeth and find no particular taste, only the faint memory of reed dust. It is not the sort of freshness that announces itself. It is the sort that makes absence feel like a presence. You roll the mat halfway, shaking loose a few bits of chaff that have worked free from its weave. They scatter into the breeze, vanishing against the stone. As you lean the mat back against the wall, you breathe once more through your mouth, and the air feels as if it has been shaped to fit you. In the quietest corner of your courtyard, where the wall leans inward to meet the shade of a half-woven reed mat, you spread the mat out on the ground to dry. The scent that rises from it is a mixture of dust, sun, and the faint memory of the river reeds it was woven from. The air here feels still, as though the day itself has paused to rest its weight on the shadows. You lie back on the mat, the stiff reeds pressing faint patterns into your skin. The coolness from the shaded earth seeps through the weave, and you let your jaw slacken so the breath moves freely. The still air is not empty. It carries the faint sweetness of dry reeds, the ghost of yesterday's incense that clung to your linen collar, and the mineral calm left from the salt you used earlier. A steady fact fits here. Reed mats, whether spread for sleeping, working, or resting, often carried a scent of their own, especially when woven fresh. This smell, light but persistent, could influence the air you breathed and the taste that settled in your mouth, blending subtly with the traces of herbs or pastes used earlier in the day. You turn your head toward the wall, where a small bundle of reeds leans in the corner, waiting to be split and woven. Their scent is sharper than the mat's greener, with a faint bite, as if the river is still clinging to them. When the breeze from the courtyard gate stirs, the scent drifts over you, settling in the back of your throat like a mild tea. A fringe tidbit comes to mind, told by a visiting mat weaver. Sleeping on a freshly woven mat, she claimed, would season the mouth overnight, so that by morning the breath would be as clean as the mat's first weave. Whether this is craft, pride, or truth, you've noticed that after a night on a new mat, the air in your mouth does feel lighter, even if no herbs or resins have been used. You close your eyes and draw a slow breath through your nose, letting the dry reed smell pass into your mouth. It has no sweetness, no spice, only a calm neutrality that makes whatever traces remain the faint salt. The echo of fig from earlier stand out more clearly. It feels as though the mat is pulling the air into itself and then giving it back, filtered through its own stillness. Scholars rarely speak of such things. They catalog mats as objects, measure their weave, note the durability of river reeds in dry climates. But the way a mat shapes the day's breath that does not appear in their scrolls. Such details belong to lived hours, to courtyards like this, to the quiet between tasks. You remain there long enough for the sun to creep higher and the mat to grow warmer under your back. The smell changes slightly, deepening with the heat, the green edge softening into something more like straw. You open your mouth just a little and taste the difference. The way a change in light can alter the way a wall looks. When you sit up, the mat leaves a faint crosshatch on your arms. You brush them off lightly, then run your fingers along the mat's surface. A small splinter of reed comes away, and you hold it to your nose before setting it aside. The scent is the same as the bundle in the corner, fresh, sharp, and honest. You think you might chew a piece later, not for its flavor, but for the way it ties the mouth to the river without needing water. For now, you roll the mat and lean it against the wall, the reed smell still hanging in the air. As you leave the corner, your breath feels settled, uncolored by anything new but framed by the gentle calm of the reeds. It is not freshness in the way of mint or resin. It is a quieter kind, like a swept floor that needs no perfume to show it has been cared for. Near the edge of the village, where the earth turns pale and the wind comes unbothered from the flats, a line of tamarisk trees holds its ground. Their trunks are lean and sinewy, bark in thin lifting plates that look like fish scales turned to wood. Fine sprays of needles hang in soft tassels, catching the light the way wet hair does after bathing. You know these trees. Tough, salt, tolerant, generous in small, practical ways. You choose a young branch no thicker than your smallest finger and, with a patient twist, coax loose a strip of outer bark. It yields reluctantly, threads clinging, the curl tight as it leaves the branch. The strip feels light and dry, with a fibrous back that roughens your fingertips. You bring it to your nose first. The scent is faint, a dry, resin-touched bitterness, like smoke remembered rather than smoke present. A steady fact fits quietly into the moment. Tamarisk served many uses along the river, and the salty margins, timber for light work, shade for animals, brush for hearths, and bark or twigs as humble mouth tools. In more than one household memory, a bit of tamarisk sits where other folk might keep toothpicks, chosen because it is there, because it is strong, and because its taste, though bitter, tends to settle the breath after coarse meals. No fanfare, just habit hardened into custom. You soften the strip with a breath and a touch of water from your palm, then press an end between your front teeth. The first flavor is dry and tannic, not harsh, but very clear about itself. You do not chew quickly. You wait as moisture finds the fibers and coaxes them to bend. The strip flattens against your tongue with each closing of the jaw, and a woody sweetness peeks through the bitterness, like the pale line of river appearing between rushes. You push the softened edge along the inner teeth, letting it brush the places where last night's bread and this morning's grain prefer to linger. You roll the strip and work it side to side, slow strokes that rasp as lightly as linen pulled across baked clay. The sound sits in your own head more than in the air. There is a proper pace to this, the bark teaching the mouth as much as the mouth uses the bark. Do not hurry, do not grind. Let the fibers do what they were made to do. Your tongue follows after, the inspector's lamp in a narrow corridor, noting smoothness where roughness lived a moment before. A fringe tidbit arrives with the same shameless confidence as market gossip. Some swear that if you collect tamarisk bark shaved on a day when the wind blows straight from the north and soak it in river water overnight, the bark will learn the river's patience. Chewed after sunrise, it is said to quiet a quick tongue better than any elder's glare. Whether this is weather magic or just a reminder to be deliberate, the story has traveled farther than the tree's roots and clings as readily as the bark did to its branch. You split the softened strip with your thumbnail, making two narrower tassels, and bend them back and forth until the fibers feather. Now the bark becomes a brush. You sweep along the gum line, careful to bow the bristles rather than jab with them. The taste shifts again, the bitterness thins, a dim sweetness grows rounder, and a mineral note appears, as if a handful of clean stones had been rinsed and set in your mouth for a moment. You pause and breathe through your nose. The air that leaves you carries little story now, only the neatness of work underway. Scholars, when they peer into baskets and jars brought from old rooms to bright tables, argue softly about which wood served most often as chewing sticks. Acacia speaks loudly in texts. Palm plays its steady part. Tamarisk stands at the edge, present in the landscape, present in tool lists, but not always named plainly in the mouth's company. Did households choose by taste, by ease of cutting, by the way the wood split into fibers? Were certain districts loyal to tamarisk, while others held palm? Fragments give hints and then turn their faces away. Your twig gives all the answer you need. It works. You rinse the little brush with a sip of water and return to the back teeth, counting without numbers. A slow sweep, another, a tap to loosen what clings, another sweep. Saliva answers, bright and helpful, thinning the bitterness until only a lively dryness remains. When you spit, the thread of brown that leaves your mouth looks like tea too shy to stain. The dust drinks it without ceremony. The tamarisk's own breath drifts around you. These trees often stand where salt wants to rule the ground, and their needles, when the wind combs them, carry a thin, clean sharpness. Standing here, you feel that edge under the tongue, a memory of the taste that arrived a few breaths earlier. It is not perfume. It is the absence of sweetness, the steadiness that lets other flavors rest without crowding. You take a fresh strip smaller this time, from a twig that snapped when you bent it and touch its sap to your lip. The resin is slight, but present, a hint of green bitterness that your mouth translates as clear. If you rub it along a front tooth, the strip squeaks faintly, and the enamel feels newly dry, like a polished stone set out of water to warm. You test with your tongue, no drag. Another small, uncertain note stands on the threshold of knowledge and refuses to enter. Were bits of bark ever steeped with herbs to make them gentler or more fragrant before use? A few household lines speak of soaking twigs. They do not say in what. Some bowls show ghost stains that could be herb, could be nothing but time. You imagine a jar scented with mint, where bark sleeps and wakes slightly kinder. Perhaps that was done. Perhaps it was merely talked about as women shelled beans and men mended baskets. The jar in your hand is plain water, and that is enough. You finish by folding the last of the softened fibers on themselves and pinching them into a small wad. You press it against the tongue and draw forward, the way you did with papyrus earlier in the day, borrowing the same logic for a different tool. The bark's grain leaves a flat neatness behind, and the mouth feels swept and aired. When you cast the spent tassel to the ground, it lands beside the tamarisk's own fallen plates, becoming indistinguishable within a breath. The tree accepts the return without comment. You wet your lips, lift your head to the light, and pull one slow lungful of air past teeth that no longer whisper of bread or wine or sweet figs. They speak only of wood and work and clean gum. A breeze steps out from the flats and walks through the tassels above. For a moment the branches sound like 1,000 soft brushes in 1,000 quiet mouths, and then the sound is only wind again. You stand until the taste in your mouth has settled from bitter to pleasantly plain, until the vague sweetness that hides in all plant work shows itself, and then thins. You turn back toward the village. The path holds small salt crystals here and there, glittering like dropped seeds of frost. You breathe, and the breath that leaves you is unadorned, simple as linen washed and stretched to dry. If later you choose to dress it with anise or honey or smoke, it will accept those guests easily. For now, the mouth is satisfied with bark and patience. In the dimmer half of your room, where the light comes filtered through a woven screen, a wide-bellied basin sits on a low stand. The water within is cool from shade alone, and on its surface float several lotus petals you gathered at dawn, pale blue shading toward white, their tips just touching where the basin curves. The petals move when you step close, not from any breeze, but from the small displacement of your body in the room's quiet air. The scent is faint and clean, the kind you only notice when you hesitate long enough to let it find you. You kneel and rest your hands on the basin's rim. The clay feels pleasantly cool, rough where the potter's fingers turned it, smooth where time and washing have done their own finishing. You tilt your head and watch the way light from the doorway breaks on the water's skin, laying a rippling lattice over the petals. The room smells of dry reed mat, a trace of yesterday's resin, and the soft, green sweetness that the lotus lends to anything it touches. A plain, steady fact drifts to the surface here. Lotus flower, seed, and sometimes root occupied a gentle but persistent place in Egyptian life, hovering between sacred and ordinary. Painted garlands crowned banquets and rites, blooms appeared at noses in countless scenes, seeds traveled in jars, and the flower's calm, clean perfume knit itself to ideas of rebirth and composure. Water scented by lotus, whether deliberately or by the accident of a garland left to rest, was used to wash hands, to cool the face, and sometimes, as you do now, to rinse the mouth. You pinch one petal lightly and lift it, letting a small sheet of water fall from its edge. The droplet trail glitters briefly in the dimness before the floor drinks it. You bring the petal to your nose. Up close, the fragrance is more like the memory of fragrance. Not strong, not floral in the way of gardens, but watery and clean, with a whisper of sweetness that suggests patience more than perfume. You let the petal fall back onto the water and watch it settle with a polite shiver. You bend and sip from cupped fingers rather than from a cup, wanting the petal coolness to meet your lips without any other taste between. The first mouthful is simple, cool, barely sweet, with a roundness that plain water sometimes lacks. You hold it in your mouth, let your cheeks widen until the water reaches the edges, and then move it slowly over your teeth. It feels like a quieting, as if someone has drawn a soft cloth over the day's earlier flavors and asked them to rest. When you tip your head and release the water back into the basin, it returns without complaint, and the petals turn once, as if acknowledging your use. A fringe tidbit, learned from a singer who sleeps late and trusts the dusk more than the dawn, says that if you rinse over lotus petals and spit the water past your left shoulder, you leave behind not only stale breath, but any unkind words you might have spoken if you had kept that breath. He swore his quarrels ended at the basin's rim on nights he bothered to do it. Whether basins accept such burdens or simply hear a confession no human does, the gesture has a charm that fits the room's quiet. You do not spit over any shoulder today. You let the water return to the bowl and keep your shoulders for other work. You rinse again, this time running your tongue along the back of your teeth while the water is still in your mouth. The coolness reaches further, softening any roughness from salt and grain. When you lift your head, you breathe out slowly through pursed lips, and the air that leaves you feels widened, as if corridors have been cleared of baskets and stools to allow a freer passage. In the stillness afterward, the faintest suggestion of lotus remains, not quite a flavor, more like a condition of the air you carry. Scholars step carefully here, shoes in hand, and wonder aloud in their measured voices. Were basins intentionally pedaled for rinsing, or did petals happen to be present because garlands were soaking to keep them fresh for head and hand? Some lists mention lotus water in the same lines as face washing and hair smoothing. Others place lotus only among garlands and offerings. The species themselves tangled the debate: blue lotus, white lotus, water lily, by other names preserved in pigment more clearly than in words. Did one scent the water more than another? Were certain houses loyal to a particular blossom? The fragments lift a petal and put it down again without deciding. You draw the basin a finger's width nearer and, with the pad of your thumb, press a petal against the rim to bruise it slightly. A pale thread of perfume rises, delicate but sure. You dip your fingers along that zone of brightness and let the water slip into your mouth in 3 small measures, each held for the length of a slow inward breath. The repeated cooling feels like a kindness performed without any need to be witnessed. Your gums answer by settling. Your tongue lies easier against the roof of your mouth. On the floor by the stand, a shard of old pottery serves as a rest for tools you do not wish to wet. A small reed toothpick, a frayed palm fiber, today unused. You look at them and decide to keep the basin's calm unbroken by other textures. There are mornings for abrasion and scrubbing. This one belongs to the watery manners of petals. A fly investigates the rim and changes its mind in an absent-minded, looping way. You watch the loop and feel no impulse to swat. Another sip, another return to the bowl. The circles that spread from your lips' touch reach the petals and nudge them into a slow dance. You think of painted banquet scenes, where guests sniff blossoms held daintily to the nose, and wonder whether the gesture was for the camera of the wall or for the mouth's private satisfaction. Perhaps both. The body learns to enjoy what the eye repeats. A small uncertainty curls at the edge of the water, like a leaf that cannot decide whether to drown. Some say that petals left too long sour the basin, that the sweetness turns and lays a film you can feel on the gums. Others say the opposite, that a long soak thickens the scent and makes the mouth as composed as a priest's face at noon. You keep to the middle ground. Petals gathered the same morning, rinsed by midday, thrown to the garden before the sun declines. Practice is a quieter kind of truth. You slide one petal aside with your fingertip and see how clean the water's surface is beneath it. No scum, no dust, only the faint trail where the petal rode. You cup your hand, take the last mouthful you will allow yourself, and hold it while you count the length of 7 slow heartbeats. With each beat, the cool touches a new corner. With each corner, the day seems to move a little further away from last night and a little closer to itself. You let the water go and feel the release like a seam loosened in a linen tunic. The room listens with you. Outside, the lane offers the muted clatter of a jar set down a little too firmly, then the scratch of a broom, then the far-off laugh of someone surprised by nothing serious. Inside, the basin gives back only its small lapping sound as the petal you bruised finds its level. You lean your elbows on your knees and inhale through your nose, then exhale through your mouth. The exhale carries a freshness that does not belong to mint or honey or smoke. It belongs to water taught by a flower to behave like air. A last, patient tidbit, less rumor than practice, returns from a long-ago morning when you watched an ant fold petals in linen and press them briefly between 2 smooth tiles warmed by the sun. She called it teaching the cloth to remember the pond. When she later dabbed that cloth at the corners of her mouth before speaking to a visitor, her breath seemed to part the hot afternoon more easily than yours ever does. You have sometimes done the same, when visitors mattered. Today, there are no visitors. The basin is audience enough. You lift the petals one by one. Give each a small squeeze over the water to gather whatever it wishes to surrender, and then carry them to the doorway. They fall into the narrow strip of garden with a soft, almost inaudible sound. The soil will take what remains of their scent. The air will keep a hint for another breath or two. You return to the basin and tip it gently, pouring the water into a jar used for floor dusting. Nothing is wasted if it can still cool or clean. When you stand, the room seems a shade clearer, as if someone opened a second small window you cannot see. Your mouth holds only a light, even calm. No sharpness, no sugar. The taste is the absence of taste, rimmed with the memory of a flower that prefers not to announce itself. You tie back the screen to brighten the room by a finger's width and move on with the day. The basin dries in the corner, the stand cool under your palm, the reed mat whispering beneath your steps like paper that has decided to behave. The lane beyond your courtyard narrows until it becomes more of a shaded passage, its walls leaning toward each other as though they are tired from holding up the day. At its end, you find the small workshop of a man who works with gum arabic. The smell greets you before the doorway does, warm, resinous, with a faint sweetness that makes you think of figs dried in the sun, though the gum itself has never seen fruit. Inside, the air is soft with dust that is not unpleasant. It carries the weight of years' worth of powder ground from brittle amber lumps. On a low shelf sit clay bowls filled with pieces of gum, each no larger than a pigeon's egg. Their surface is clouded, but still catching light in their creases. You lift one and feel how it sticks faintly to your fingers, even though it is dry. When you press it to your lips, the resin holds its shape, giving no taste until you warm it. A steady fact belongs here. Gum arabic, drawn from the acacia tree, had many uses in Egypt as a binder for pigments, as a glaze for sweets, as a base for perfumes. Less recorded but quietly practiced was its use to moisten the mouth and freshen breath. Chewed slowly, it released a faint sweetness and left a light film that soothed the tongue and gums, especially in the dry air. You take a seat on a low stool, the gum piece still resting in your palm. The man nods, as though he knows you will not speak until you have chewed. You set the gum against your back teeth and bite just enough to break the surface. The first resistance gives way to a surprising softness, like wax that has agreed to bend. As it warms, the gum releases a taste that is not quite sugar and not quite sap, but a mild sweetness with a hint of the tree's shadow in it. A fringed tidbit slips into your thoughts, one told by a woman who embroidered linens for temple offerings. She claimed that if you chewed gum arabic while reciting words you hoped would be remembered, those words would stick in the air, just as the gum stuck to the teeth. Whether this is simple poetry or a belief that breath can hold shape, it has the quiet charm of things never proven but often repeated. The gum moves slowly between your teeth now, yielding to each bite, leaving the mouth lightly coated. The sensation is both soothing and protective, as if the air you breathe is wrapped in a thin layer before touching your throat. You press your tongue against the roof of your mouth and feel the faint tackiness that lingers, not unpleasant, almost like the memory of honey diluted in water. Scholars have noted gum arabic in lists of trade goods and temple supplies, but argue over whether its role in mouth care was deliberate or incidental. Was it chewed for its own sake, or simply softened in the mouth before being added to other mixtures? In some cases, the answer hides behind the practice itself. A thing done daily for many reasons rarely leaves a clear mark in the scrolls. You work the gum until it loses most of its sweetness, yet the coating it leaves remains. Breathing out through your nose, you notice the air feels less sharp, as though filtered. The effect is subtle, not the strong perfume of anise or mint, but a quiet smoothing of the breath, like running a damp cloth over a dusty jar. When you take the gum from your mouth, it has turned translucent, more amber than before. You set it on the edge of the stool, where it cools and stiffens in the shaded air. The workshop's owner gathers the piece later. He will soften it again with water and use it for binding pigment. In this way, nothing is wasted, a breath freshened, then a color fixed. You step back into the lane, and the sunlight seems sharper after the resins calm. Still, your mouth holds that faint sweetness, and when you speak, even to yourself, the words feel as though they glide out more easily. There is no lingering taste of the morning's bread or wine, only the soft echo of a tree's gift, worked between teeth until it agreed to become part of your breath. By afternoon, the river has gathered its own voice, a low conversation of water against bank, boat against rope, reed against reed. The light is no longer a clean blade. It is a wide sheet sliding down the sky. You find a stretch of embankment where the mud has dried into cracked tiles, and you sit on a warm stone with your feet just above the shade line. The air here is fuller than in the lanes it carries silt, leaf, distant cooking, and the sun-warmed smell of wet rope. Still, when the breeze lifts, it feels like a hand passing over a jar's rim. Simple, cooling, purposeful. You part your lips a little and let the wind move through your teeth. There is no herb now, no resin, no powder, only the river's breath meeting your own. The first passes are tentative. The mouth has learned to expect flavor and finds none. But as you settle, the breeze does its quieter work. It dries what is too damp, loosens what clings, and carries off a faint, tired edge that morning's care did not quite take. You inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth, slow and even, until the rhythm matches the small slap of water against a mooring post. A plain, settled fact keeps company with the wind. Life here has long hinged on air and water, in tandem courtyards arranged for cross drafts, jars set where evaporation cools, work timed, so that breezes serve rather than fight. Mouths, like rooms, respond to moving air, not written as recipe or rite. This practice still belongs to daily keeping. Stand where the river breathes, and it will lend your breath a little of its clearness. You tilt your head so the current of air traces the curve of one cheek, then the other. The sensation is not taste, but something near taste. A thinning, a lightness, a small relief where the tongue meets the roof of the mouth. You wet your lips once and then leave them. The wind performs better on a plain surface than on one fussed into shine. You feel it past the front teeth first, then the molars, then the soft back of the mouth. And with each pass, the heat of the day steps back half a pace. A fringed tidbit wanders in from a boat. Hands banter, the sort of claim made with a grin, and kept because it pleases. If you count 7 little waves in a row and time your breath so that your exhale ends as the 7th wave laps the bank, the river will take the sour from your mouth and keep it until dusk. The rule is needless, of course. The river pays no mind to counting, but you try it anyway, because the counting softens the mind, and the mind, softened, lets the mouth follow. 1 small lap, 2, 3. The numbers hold you steady as the wind threads your teeth. Nearby, a corded bundle of nets lies in the sun, giving off a clean hemp smell with a hint of fish that has long since dried into memory rather than substance. A boy drags a pole along the bank, carving a shallow groove in the damp where the shade has returned. You watch the line form and think of the delicate lines the wind draws inside your mouth, invisible, but felt as outlines where roughness used to be. The tongue maps them without haste, approving each place the air has flattened. Scholars would have little to say about this, which is perhaps why the practice remains yours to claim. Scrolls preserve the making of fragrant things and the measuring of herbs. They do not preserve a person sitting with the wind on their teeth until the day loosens. When learned men speak of climate and design, they may nod toward colonnades and drafts, but their ink rarely wanders into the mouth's private weather. The uncertainty here is not a dispute, only an absence. No fragment tells you whether others counted 7 waves or 12, whether they preferred the wind that comes downriver or the one that climbs from the flats. The past leaves you room to choose. You close your mouth and let the breeze touch closed lips, then open again to feel the difference. Closed, it cools the skin and the small, exposed edges. Open, it cools the inner walls and the teeth themselves, which seem to sigh like stones relieved of sun. You move your jaw a finger's width and listen to the soft click at one hinge. The sound is not complaint, only acknowledgement. The body is a room with doors and windows. Today, you are briefly all window. A small boat glides past, barely troubling the surface. The oarsman watches the bank with the still attention of someone who prefers to see rather than be seen. A distant pair of ibises lifts and settles again. Reeds tap together like fingernails on pottery. None of it asks anything from you. The river does not hurry you, and the wind refuses to be owned. You are a guest who has learned not to talk too much in another's house. The breeze freshens for a few breaths and brings with it the greenness of upriver fields, crushed stems, wet soil, the blossomless perfume of growing things. There is a sweetness in it that is not fruit sweet, a sweetness that seems to arise from the thought of shade itself. It passes through your mouth and leaves nothing heavy behind, only the suggestion that your next word, whenever it comes, will step into clean space. You shift on the stone so that your back finds the place where warmth lingers. The contrast, warm at the spine, cool at the gums, clarifies everything. The taste that remains from the gum you chewed earlier in the day thins to a sliver. The faint tang of palm wine is now only a rumor. Natron's mineral thread, once bright, lies flat and well-mannered. This is the river's particular gift. Not to erase, but to smooth. What you kept from morning is still there, but it no longer announces itself with every breath. Another odd claim comes to mind, passed from a ferry keeper with a voice so deep it seemed carved from the bank itself. He swore that if you held a small, smooth pebble between your front teeth while facing the current, the wind would learn your mouth and return it to you sweeter the next day. He demonstrated this with great seriousness, jaw gently clamped on a stone polished to a shine. Perhaps the trick simply kept the lips parted and the teeth aligned so the air could do its work. Perhaps the river humored him. You do not carry a pebble. You use a fingertip lightly on the chin to keep the mouth at the small, open angle the wind favors. You test the result with a silent phrase, moving breath but not voice. The shape of the words pours out smoothly. The corners do not snag. Even silence feels cleaner after the river has passed through it. You take one small sip from a jar you set beside you on the stone plain water rinse once, and let it fall back to the bank, where a thirsty patch of silt darkens and brightens as it drinks. The rinse does not fight the wind, it follows it, a companionable second gesture. Scholars might argue about the hour best suited to this: early, when the air is thin and cool, or afternoon, when thermals gather strength. The record will not help them. You only know that your mouth, now, in the later light, has given up its heaviness. The breath leaves without the push you felt earlier. It seems to step down from the tongue rather than climb over it. A herdsman walks the ridge above the bank, calling a name you can't quite catch. The call stretches and thins across the water. On its path, your mouth feels its own edges again and relaxes them. The herdsman's voice fades. A fly lands on your wrist and thinks better of it. A dragonfly balances in place like a pin holding blue silk. Nothing asks you to move, and yet you rise. The stone has given you enough. Before you go, you hold your mouth open to the breeze for a count of 10 slow heartbeats. You do not hurry to reach 10. It arrives. On the last beat, you close your lips, press the tongue softly to the teeth, and breathe out through the nose. The inside of the mouth is a quiet room. The walls are cool. The floor is swept. If you were to speak, the word would wear sandals, not boots. You step back from the cracked mud and onto the lane, which feels louder by comparison even though no one is there. The river follows you only as a suggestion, caught in the weave of your linen and the small hollows above your teeth. Each exhale carries a lightness that costs you nothing and promises nothing it cannot keep. One final uncertainty walks at your side like a shadow that wishes to be helpful. Did anyone long ago give this practice a name, not a great one fit for a tablet, just a household nickname? River, breath perhaps, or bank cleaning. No shard keeps the word for you. Still, the mouth knows what has been done. Names are for telling others. This is mostly for you. By the time you reach the first shaded doorway, the breeze has thinned to a ribbon trailing at your shoulder. You carry the rest inside your chest. When you greet the neighbor who looks up from mending a jar, the greeting leaves you as if it had just washed its hands. The neighbor nods, and the day continues, slightly better than it was. The heat has settled into the courtyard like a guest who intends to stay. From the kitchen corner comes the easy, honest smell of a midday stew onions, softened in oil until they turn sweet. then cooked with lentils and a shake of ground cumin. You eat without hurry from a shallow bowl, the rim warm against your fingers. The stew answers the day with steadiness, comforting because it does not try to be clever. When the bowl is empty, the comfort remains, and so does the onion, faithful, generous, unwilling to leave before it has said everything it meant to say. You rise and rinse the bowl, tilting it so the last line of broth darkens the dust. The breath you exhale carries a softness and a bite at once. The onion has made a home behind your teeth and under your tongue. You do not scold it. This is what onions do. Still, there is the business of the afternoon neighbors to greet, a short errand to run, a word or two that will travel more kindly if the onion loosens its hold. On a small shelf by the doorway sits a clay cup of fennel seeds. The cup is plain and slightly chipped, the kind that lives on without ceremony. You lift it and bring it close to your nose. The first scent is green and sweet, with a thread of licorice, not as sharp as anise, rounder, more domestic. If anise is a clear bell, fennel is a warm reed pipe. You let the scent arrive, then take a pinch and scatter the seeds into your palm. A steady fact fits comfortably here. Fennel grew along the river edges and in garden plots, and appears in lists of herbs used for both cooking and simple remedies. Chewed after meals, its seeds sweetened the breath, and were believed to ease the heavy fullness that follows onion and pulse. Its presence in household baskets is not a surprise. It belongs there in the way a reed mat belongs to a floor. You slip a small handful into your mouth and begin with a gentle bite. The first seeds crack with a soft grit, and their oil opens warm, sweet, and faintly cooling at the same time. The licorice note lifts and then settles. The onion at once steps back a little, as if someone has politely asked it to speak more softly. You chew slowly, pressing the oil along your gums with the side of your tongue, letting it find every place where the stew had left its signature. A fringe tidbit rides in on a remembered joke from a spice seller. If you chew fennel while telling a price, your number sounds wiser. He swore the seeds make the voice smooth and patient, which is another way of saying they help you do what patience would have done by itself. Whether a coin changes hands more easily because of fennel or because of calm, the tidbit has stayed in your mind long enough to become nearly true. You keep chewing, and the seeds soften until they give up sweetness without grit. The breath that leaves you now carries fennel first and onion second, and each exhale feels a degree cooler than the air you draw in. You take another pinch, fewer seeds this time, and tuck them into your cheek to let their oil escape slowly, keeping the flavor alive while your jaw rests. The courtyard has taken on afternoon's quiet. A fly circles the basin and then changes its mind. A lizard surveys the wall as if the wall might move. The sun pushes a pale rectangle of light across the floor that stops just short of your feet. You roll one seed with your molars and feel its shell give with a soft click. The taste begins again, small and fresh. Scholars step near this shelf and argue in their careful way. When a recipe or remedy mentions sweet seed, does it always mean fennel, or sometimes anise, or sometimes something else that shared a family resemblance and a name? Seed husks do not always survive cleanly. Words trade places in mouths that pronounce them in different districts. The lists that remain to you are firm about seed and sweetness, but less firm about which plant offered which sweetness. The uncertainty keeps its seat at the table and eats politely. You bring a cup of cool water and wet your lips before another measured bite. The water does not wash the fennel away. It carries the warmth forward, thinning it into calm. You catch yourself breathing more slowly, not because anything is wrong, but because slowness suits the seed. There is a custom, half superstition and half simple good sense, that after onion stew you chew fennel in pairs. 2 seeds for the teeth that worked hardest, 2 for the tongue that speaks too quickly, 2 for any word you wish you had not said last week. You do not count exactly, but your fingers learn the rhythm and keep it. The counting is not the point. The point is the gentle attention to the work of making the mouth agreeable to the day again. You test your breath against your palm and find it no longer belongs to the kitchen alone. The onion has become background, the way the river is background when you stand in a field, felt, known, but not the whole of what you notice. The fennel's sweetness has taken the higher ground, and with it comes a quiet order. The gums feel awake but not stung. The tongue feels clean at the edges. The roof of the mouth feels flat and untroubled. A neighbor passes the open gate and calls a greeting. You answer without thinking, and hear your own voice return to you in the courtyard's modest echo, smooth as a reed laid true. If the fennel has made it so, you are content. If it is only the relief of finishing a simple task, you are content with that too. Another pinch, only a few seeds now, for the road. You place them under your tongue as a traveler tucks a small coin in a hidden fold, not for immediate use, but to know it is there. The seeds sit quietly, and each step on the stone outside seems to coax a little more of their warmth into your breath. A last small uncertainty wanders through your thoughts as you walk. Was fennel always the seed reached for after onion? Or did families trade preferences the way they trade recipes? Some loyal to anise, some to cumin mixed with honey, some to coriander and a sip of wine? No written line hands you a final rule. Your shelf holds fennel today, and today that is the rule. At the lane's bend, the sun brushes your shoulder. The air smells of clay warming for evening, of a potter's damp hands, of dust that will settle as soon as no one is looking at it. You bite one final seed and feel the tiny bloom of sweetness spread and fade. The breath that leaves you now is steady and friendly, the kind that makes room for a second voice beside it without crowding. The stew remains a memory in the belly rather than a story in the mouth. You keep the cup of seeds on the shelf by the door when you return, setting it where your hand finds it without effort. The chips along its rim catch a speck of light and hold it. You press your lips together and let them part again, testing the smooth slide of air. It moves easily. The afternoon opens by a finger's width, and you step into it as though the door had just been oiled. The light has begun its slow bend toward evening, and the streets have cooled enough for the small vendors to return to their places. At the corner where two lanes meet, a low wooden table is set with neat rows of dates, some dark and wrinkled, some pale and plump, each with a sheen that catches what's left of the sun. The vendor sits cross-legged behind them, sorting with the calm of someone who has done this for more seasons than he can count. You stop, not because you need dates, but because their smell draws you in. It is a deep sweetness, more earthy than sugar, carrying the warmth of the palms they hung from and the dust of the baskets they traveled in. You pick one soft to the touch, and the vendor nods as if to say it is a good choice. A settled fact belongs here. Dates were a constant in the Egyptian diet, eaten fresh, dried, or pressed into cakes. Their natural sugars made them both a food and, in small amounts, a gentle sweetener for the mouth after stronger flavors. Chewed slowly, they left a lingering richness that could cover the bite of garlic, onion, or fish, while their stickiness helped draw away small bits caught between teeth. You press the date between your fingers until it yields, then bite into it. The skin gives with barely a sound, and the flesh inside is thick, almost syrupy. The sweetness moves over your tongue in waves, not the sharp spike of honey, but a rounded, patient kind of sweet. The pit rests against your teeth like a smooth stone in a stream. You turn it once in your mouth, then spit it into your palm and set it on the edge of the table. A fringe tidbit comes from the vendor himself, murmured as though it is worth more if spoken quietly. Eat 3 dates in the evening, and your breath will greet the night kindly. He claims it is a rule older than the market itself, though he admits no one agrees on whether it's the sweetness or the oil in the fruit that does the work. You take his word for it, partly because he says it with no effort, as though the truth should not have to convince you. You chew the last of the flesh until it becomes a soft paste, then press your tongue to the roof of your mouth to spread it. The air that passes out feels slower now, wrapped in that deep, even sweetness. It is not the brightness of mint or the spice of fennel. It is something more like a quiet curtain hanging between your breath and the world. The vendor offers you another, this one lighter in color. It is firmer, the skin less yielding, the flesh fibrous. The sweetness here is gentler, leaving the mouth less coated, as if it has come only to visit and not to stay. You prefer the first for its lingering weight, but the second has its own honesty, and your mouth feels cleaner for having chewed it. Scholars make note of dates and trade records and household tallies, but leave their role in mouth care mostly unspoken. Some point out that sticky foods can carry away debris between teeth. Others argue this is a side effect, not a purpose. Still, a scroll fragment found in the temple storehouse lists dates fresh after garlic, which suggests someone thought about it at least once. The uncertainty remains whether this was advice, habit, or just the way someone liked to eat. You let the sweetness fade slowly while you watch the lane. Children drift past, dragging sticks against the walls. A potter carries a stack of bowls, one hand steadying the tower, the other cupping the lowest base. The air holds a faint echo of roasting grain from farther up the street, mixing with the fruit's warmth in your mouth. A woman buying figs stops at the table and selects a handful of the same dark dates you first tried. She glances at you and says, half to herself, that the best dates leave the breath as soft as the palm that grew them. You file the phrase away, not because you believe it entirely, but because it feels like the sort of thing that should be remembered. You pay the vendor for a small pouch and tuck it into your belt. The dates inside are warm from the day, and their scent drifts upward with each step you take. Every so often, you slip one into your mouth, letting it rest before you bite. The sweetness arrives again, folds itself over the earlier taste, and lingers until you swallow. The sun tilts lower, painting the tops of the walls in gold. The shadows grow longer, and the lane begins to cool. Your mouth is steady now, the breath carrying no single sharp note, only the quiet fullness the fruit has left behind. You pass through the market's last stretch before the open field, the pouch against your side like a promise you can keep without trying. When you reach the edge of the street, you take one more date, dark, soft, and warm, and eat it in 3 slow bites. The air that leaves you afterward is as even as the light, and just as willing to fade without notice. Evening leans in, drawing the shadows longer across the street until they fold into each other. The day's voices grow fewer, replaced by the low shuffle of sandals and the occasional clink of a closing gate. You follow a narrow lane toward a small garden that hides behind an unremarkable wall. Inside, the air feels cooler, not only from the shade, but from the rows of green that keep the ground damp and the breeze scented. You know this garden for one thing above the rest: its spearmint bed. The plants stand low but thick, their leaves a dull green in the fading light, their edges slightly curled from the day's heat. You kneel beside them and pinch a sprig between your fingers. At once, the scent rises fresh, cool, sharp in a way that travels up through the nose before it settles into the mouth. A clear, steady fact rests here. Mint grew easily in the floodplain and was valued for both cooking and cleansing. Its leaves, chewed fresh, cooled the mouth and left the breath lightly perfumed. Temple records mention mint oil among offerings to certain gods, suggesting its scent held more than just household importance. You pluck a few leaves and place them on your tongue. At first, they are soft and almost grassy, the coolness still folded within them. Then, as you chew, the flavor opens a clean, green sharpness that spreads quickly, pushing away the heaviness of the day's other tastes. The air you exhale is suddenly lighter, cooler, as if it has been stored in a clay jar set deep in shade. A fringe tidbit comes from an old neighbor who once claimed that if you chewed mint while looking at the moon, the coolness in your breath would last until the first rooster's cry. Whether it was the moonlight, the mint, or simply the slowness of standing outside at night, you never knew. But the image of it has followed you, and the thought makes the leaves on your tongue seem just a little colder. You chew more slowly now, pressing the juice along your gums. It tingles faintly, as though the leaf is still alive and moving. The roof of your mouth feels smooth, the tongue sharper in its edges. You breathe out toward your hands and feel the coolness drift back against your skin. Gentler now, but still certain. The garden is quiet, except for the faint sound of water trickling somewhere unseen. The mint scent hangs just above the ground, mixing with the damp smell of soil and the softer green of other plants nearby. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the air fill with this simple mixture. When you open them again, the leaves in your hand have darkened slightly from your warmth. Scholars note mint's place in trade and medicine, but still debate which type was most valued: spearmint for its sweetness, peppermint for its sharper bite, or wild river mint for its stubborn resilience. The names in the record sometimes trade places, and the descriptions wander between the three. The uncertainty leaves the garden open to all of them, each with its own claim to the breath's comfort. You place another leaf on your tongue, unchewed, letting it rest there while you breathe. The flavor escapes slowly, a soft thread weaving between inhale and exhale. The coolness spreads into the throat, not as a rush, but as a gentle clearing. The mouth feels open in a way it did not before, as if more space has been made without anything being taken away. A bat flits low over the garden wall, catching something you cannot see. The light has turned the sky into a pale wash, the first stars holding their places faintly. You press your fingertips to your lips, then breathe out, testing what remains. The coolness is still there, but it has softened into something you might carry until sleep without effort. You gather a small handful of leaves, wrap them in a piece of cloth, and tuck them at your side. They will wilt quickly, but their scent will follow you home, and perhaps into the next morning. You rise, brushing soil from your knees, and step back into the lane. The garden's air clings to you for a few steps before giving way to the warmer smell of evening fires starting in nearby courtyards. As you walk, the mint's taste shifts from its first sharpness to a low, lingering sweetness. Your tongue rests easy against your teeth. Your breath passes without catching. If you speak, it will be as though your words have been washed in a shallow stream and dried in shade. By the time you reach your doorway, the leaves in your cloth have begun to press their scent into the fabric. You set them on the shelf above the basin, where they will meet you again in the morning. The breath you carry into the house is light, touched with green, and ready to meet whatever the night chooses to bring. The sky has given itself over to night now, deep and steady, with only a thin spill of moonlight touching the street stones. Inside your home, the air feels cooler, drawn in from the courtyard and mixed with the faint sweetness of oil lamps burning low. The work of the day is done. The only task left is to prepare yourself for rest, not with haste, but with the kind of small, slow ritual that lets the body believe the day has truly ended. On the low table near your sleeping mat sits a narrow-necked jar no taller than your hand. Its clay is stained darker near the lip, where fingers have touched it over many nights. Inside is a powder made from crushed myrrh mixed with cinnamon and a trace of honey. You tip the jar slightly and see the powder shift, catching a soft amber glint in the lamplight. A steady fact holds here. Myrrh was valued in Egypt for its perfume, its preservative qualities, and its place in temple rites. Crushed into fine powder and blended with spices, it could be rolled into small pellets for chewing or left loose for rubbing on the gums. The resin's bitterness, when softened by cinnamon and honey, left the mouth scented and the breath warmed. You take a small pinch between finger and thumb, letting the fine grains fall onto your tongue. At first, the bitterness of the myrrh presses forward, dry and sharp, but almost at once the cinnamon follows, warm and sweet, rounding the edges. The honey arrives last, subtle but certain, carrying both the bitterness and the spice together into something you can hold. You close your mouth and let the mixture spread slowly, pressing your tongue against your teeth to work it in. A fringe tidbit drifts in from memory, an old story told by a spice seller that myrrh teaches the breath to move more slowly, as though the resin itself were setting the pace. Whether this is truth or only a poetic trick to sell more jars, you cannot say, but you notice that your exhale does feel longer now, the air leaving in a measured thread. The bitterness fades first, the cinnamon's heat lingering along the gums. The honey softens the roof of your mouth until it feels smooth beneath your tongue. Breathing out through your nose brings the spice up into your head, a faint prickle that clears the spaces behind your eyes. Your breath now carries a warmth without heaviness, the kind that settles rather than calls attention to itself. Scholars write plenty about myrrh in offerings, embalming, and incense, but its role in personal breath care is mentioned only in passing. Some think it was an indulgence for those who could afford it. Others believe it was a practical step before speaking in temple courts or receiving guests. Whether this mixture was luxury or necessity is a question without an answer, left to the dust between papyrus lines. You take another pinch smaller this time and let it rest between your cheek and gum. It stays there quietly, releasing flavor in small waves. Each breath carries a trace of resin and spice, enough to remind you it is there, but not enough to make you notice every moment. This is a preparation for sleep, not for speech. The lamp flickers, throwing a slow shadow across the wall. The powder jar rests where you set it, as if it knows it will be called on again tomorrow. You lie back on the mat, pulling the woven cover over your shoulders. The taste in your mouth is steady now, warm, clean, without sharpness, and your breath passes easily into the stillness. The moonlight finds its way through the courtyard gate, painting a narrow silver line across the floor. Your eyes follow it until they close. The air you take in feels cool. The air you let out carries the quiet work of myrrh, cinnamon, and honey, a mixture meant for endings, for speaking only to yourself, for resting without the taste of the day's labors. You lie on the reed mat, with the room arranged in its evening order, the jar sealed, the basin quiet, the lamp lowered to a mild amber breath. The house has its own slow rhythm now, wood settling, woven screens clicking softly when the night air passes, a grain of sand rolling in a corner because it wishes to move once more before sleep. You let your jaw grow heavy and loose. The tongue rests like a small boat tied to an easy post. The day's flavors have stepped back into the walls. Mint and honey, resin and seed, water and clean clay. What remains is gentler than taste, the calm sense that nothing presses, nothing asks. Outside, the lane hushes to sandals on dust, then to nothing at all. You breathe in through your nose and feel coolness. You breathe out through your mouth and feel warmth, even and regular, as though the air has learned your measure and is content to keep it. The breath moves across teeth that feel like polished stones, along gums that have forgotten their morning stubbornness, over a tongue that is smooth and undecorated. It is a corridor swept, a threshold rinsed, a door eased on its hinges. If a scent lingers, it is only the faintest memory of myrrh folded into cinnamon, the sort that hides behind sleep and reveals itself again at dawn. The ceiling fades to river dark, then to darker. The mat beneath you remembers the sun but does not insist upon it. You drift between the cool of the basin and the warmth of the lamp, carried by a current that is neither river nor wind, but the simple motion of breathing and being breathed. The room holds you. The night holds the room. The mouth is quiet. The day lets go. End of script. Sweet dreams.